Chapter 81, Diary. By now, Sagres had almost worked out everything he wanted to know. He tapped his wand lightly with his fingertips and let his eyes sweep over everyone in the room. The realization that this group of wizards, hailed as the best in Britain, had let such obvious clues slip past them for 50 years left him cold. Was it arrogance or simply stupidity? The tap of his wand echoed clearly in the silent infirmary, and Sagres felt increasingly that his supposed allies were useless. "Harry," he said, turning to the boy on the bed, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you have two choices." A faint blue light shivered at the wand tip. "First, help me find the culprit. Second, let me wipe your memory of tonight." Harry watched Sagres's pupils shrink dangerously when he mentioned erasing memories. "I choose the first," he blurted, more eagerly than he meant to be, and his hand went instinctively to the scar on his forehead. He swallowed. A wise choice. Sagres inclined his head and then addressed Dumbledore. "I also recommend an immediate screening of all staff and students. Even if Lord Voldemort won't repeat the same tricks, for safety's sake, everyone must be checked." A chill ran through the room. If Voldemort had returned, who might he be hiding in now? Harry's gaze flicked toward the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, who was straightening his hair in the medicine cabinet mirror, and, catching Harry's look, gave a dazzling smile that flashed white teeth in the candlelight. Harry looked away. He didn't think Voldemort would be so careless. "Professor Greengrass," Madame Pomfrey suddenly interjected, her voice trembling, "are you saying you know who might possess a student?" She gripped the corner of her robe so hard her knuckles went white. "It's only a possibility. We'll know after we check." Sagres replied, looking to the silent headmaster. "Will you arrange the screening?" Dumbledore nodded slowly. His silver beard quivered with the movement. "Beginning tomorrow, but other work must continue as well." His voice was barely more than a breath. Sagres snorted shortly, raised his wand, and pointed it at Harry. A green light flashed from the tip, and Harry felt the numbness in his arm vanish as sensation rushed back. He flexed his wrist, a faint click as his bones realigned. "I'm better." "Thank you so much, Pro." Sagres had already turned and was walking for the door. As he crossed the threshold, he tossed back without looking over his shoulder. "Remember your choice, Potter." Over the next days, Hogwarts was transformed as if by enchantment. Sagres used transfiguration to turn the castle into a hall of mirrors, curved mirrors fitted into corridor corners, prism hangings from the ceilings, and armor polished to a brilliant shine. When the sun streamed through the stained glass windows, the castle filled with a dreamlike halo. Students passing the corridors saw countless reflections of themselves moving through the mirrored surfaces. But beneath the beauty lay cold vigilance. Professor McGonagall introduced new rules. Every student had to wear specially made glasses at all times. Even the usually rebellious Weasley twins, upon hearing the rumor that looking a monster in the eye could turn you to stone, obediently donned the comical round frames. A tense, novel atmosphere settled over Hogwarts, and in that atmosphere, a sweeping screening was about to begin. Every member of staff and every student had to be examined. The professors said it was to find the culprit who had opened the Chamber of Secrets, and the younger wizards immediately began to speculate. "Do you think they'll really find who did it?" Ron asked by the Gryffindor common room fire. "How are they going to check? If it's Snape, will he use this as an excuse for revenge?" "Don't worry. Professor Greengrass is in charge." Harry interrupted, rubbing his newly healed arm. He didn't say more, but a determined light flickered in his eyes. He hadn't been acting recklessly these past few days. He still knew what to say and what to hold back. George and Fred joined the conversation. Percy and Ginny sat nearby. "Professor Greengrass will catch the culprit," George insisted. "He's brilliant, far better than Snape." "Of course," Ron agreed. "That hateful old bat can't even beat Professor Greengrass's bird." "Who do you think it is?" Hermione put down her book and asked. "Who could have opened the chamber?" As a Muggle-born, she was especially anxious. The legend of the chamber frightened her more than the others. "It must be Malfoy," Ron declared. "He's been too quiet lately. That's suspicious." Malfoy's past reputation made his sudden restraint seem ominous to their classmates. "I hope it's him, so Greengrass can expel him," someone said. "Expulsion?" Percy chimed in with rare passion, speaking in a solemn, officious tone. The culprit could be sent to Azkaban. The mention of Azkaban struck Ginny like a physical blow. She squeezed her palms until the skin white-knuckled under the pressure, leaving 4 crescent-shaped marks. The firelight trembled in her hollow eyes. The diary had been found on the first day of term. It had slipped from between the pages of a second-hand magical theory textbook she was sorting through. Its black cover gleamed with an odd sheen, as if it had a breath of its own. It was a magical diary that could talk, and it was endlessly considerate. It always guided her gently, comforting her when she felt low. She poured things into it: how she liked Harry Potter, the boy who had once defeated a Dark Lord, the strange events at Hogwarts, the rift she felt between Professor Greengrass and Dumbledore, how she wanted to take Greengrass's class because Harry was taking it, and how she thought Lockhart, though her mother adored him, was all show and no substance. Whatever she said, the diary answered just so, and Ginny began to think of it as her friend. Night after night, the quill scratched across the pages. "I saw Harry today. He looked so handsome on his broom." The ink would curl into a reply. "He is special, isn't he? Just like you, Ginny. Mum says Lockhart is the best, but his class is rubbish. True power makes no show of itself, like your Professor Greengrass." I woke up in the corridor again, with chicken feathers on my robe. Don't worry, sleepwalking runs in the Weasley family. Worse were the missing hours, blood-like writing on corridor walls, rooster feathers clutched in her hands, mud on the hems of her robes, shoes gone astray. When she saw Filch's cat petrified, a cold dread finally uncoiled in her stomach. The screening notice felt like a death knell. It seemed she had opened the Chamber of Secrets. It seemed she had become the heir, though she knew nothing of any of it. Ginny suddenly stood so quickly, her black tea sloshed onto the carpet. Startled faces watched her stumble for the girls' dormitory. In her room, her trembling fingers flipped open the diary. Tom Riddle's elegant handwriting flowed across the page. "Don't be afraid. I will always be on your side." The book in her hands grew unbearably hot, like a brand. "No," Ginny's voice broke. "I want to get rid of you, you devil." This time, she did not write the sentence in the diary with a pen. Chapter 82, Magic Mirror. Ginny Weasley clutched the scorching diary and ran through the mirror-lined corridors like a startled rabbit. Countless frantic reflections stared back at her from the maze of glass. She had to get the diary somewhere. No one would ever find it. Myrtle's bathroom was perfect, always empty and carpeted in cobwebs. Glasses on, head down, she hurried along, the diary pressed to her chest. An office door suddenly swung open, and a figure stepped out. Ginny collided full-on with a violet robe spangled with gold stars, and the diary slipped from her fingers. "Ouch!" Lockhart cried, as if wounded. "Be careful, child." "Wait, you didn't do that on purpose, did you?" He looked down and gave what he apparently thought was an inviting smile. Ginny's pupils shrank. The diary lay right by Lockhart's gleaming leather boots. She bent frantically to grab it. "I'm sorry, Professor." "Hold on a moment," Lockhart interrupted, prodding the book with his toe. Ginny's heart hammered against her ribs. He picked it up and, catching herself, opened the blank first page, a smile spreading over his face that seemed to say, "I knew it." "Ha, a fan, are you?" Lockhart preened. Ginny was mortified. "I understand. Meeting me isn't easy. I'm a very busy writer, of course." She couldn't answer. Lockhart produced a ridiculous flamboyant peacock quill. "You want my autograph, don't you? I bet you do," he murmured to himself. "You really didn't have to stage the bump, though. It's a bit dramatic, quite cliché, in fact." Ginny raised a hand, opened her mouth, tried to stop him, but nothing came out. "No need to be shy. I understand you little girls." The pen screeched across the page. In careful, ornate strokes he wrote, "To my loyal reader, Gilderoy Lockhart." Ginny's silent scream caught in her throat. She stared frozen. When he closed the diary, clearly pleased with himself, she turned and ran without looking back, leaving a bewildered Lockhart in the corridor. "Shy? Are all Weasley girls like that?" he said aloud with a shrug, humming as he tucked his trophy under his arm. "Her mother, now. She knows good taste. Quite the fan." He shook his head and went back into his office. The screening operation was run with a handful of magical devices. 4 translucent crystal balls were placed at the head of the 4 house tables. Every morning, teachers and students were to press their palms to them in turn. The mirrors set into the great hall's dome picked up and scattered eerie light, trading glints with the crystal balls. Sagres told the staff in private, if a second soul is parasitic within someone, the crystal ball will go black when touched. In truth, this was a deception. The crystal balls were ordinary and had been filched by Sagres from Trelawney's room. None of the others knew. The real measure lay beneath the great hall's archway, the mirror of Erised, wrapped in enchanted silk. Sagres had borrowed it from Dumbledore and temporarily modified it with a monitoring spell. When he waved his wand and drew the silk aside, the mirror's surface flowed like mercury, and he used transfiguration to turn it into a reflective corridor. You won't reflect desires anymore, he said, tapping the glass. You'll reflect souls. Soul tracing, an obscure, hardly ever used detection spell, was the last-ditch trick Sagres thought he'd never need. This temporary, demon-revealing mirror would secretly scan anyone who passed. If someone were inhabited by a second soul, the mirror's surface would shriek. The true trap, then, was placed in plain sight. If Lord Voldemort resorted to possession and anyone he used walked past this mirror, the deceit would be exposed instantly. After setting the system up, Sagres went back to Myrtle's bathroom to see what he could learn. Myrtle, however, sulked with her head in the toilet bowl and refused to cooperate. She hadn't forgotten that he hadn't helped her teach Peeves a lesson. You said you'd teach Peeves a lesson, her wet voice echoed through the pipes. But Peeves was hard to pin down. As Hogwarts' resident poltergeist, he was maddeningly elusive. Hunt for him obsessively and he vanishes. Stop thinking about him and he pops up to play pranks. Sagres had therefore adjusted his tactics. He began wandering the castle accompanied by Harry, methodically checking Hogwarts' subterranean plumbing. Kitchens, bathrooms, drains, places students used most often, were inspected carefully. Any sign of a basilisk there would be catastrophic. Say that pronunciation again, Sagres said, pausing before a mottled wall. Harry swallowed and forced out a low, hoarse hiss. Nothing happened. Sagres quietly repeated the strange syllable to himself, narrowing his eyes. These language drills had become a regular part of the search. While looking for the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets, they were also practicing to communicate, or at least to call via parseltongue. Sagres had learned to reproduce a set of simple commands like open, stop, and obey. It was a one-way skill. He could speak the sounds, but he couldn't hear or understand snakes. The demon-revealing mirror at the Great Hall's archway remained still and silent. Sagres often stopped before it, watching its unperturbed surface. Sometimes doubts crept in. Had the enemy already seen through his plan? Had he been looking in the wrong place all along? Still, whenever uncertainty surfaced, he would smooth his wand and move on to the next suspicious corner. His patience never ran out. Chapter 83, Duel Club. Meanwhile, Gilderoy Lockhart lay back on the pink gold sofa in his office. After reworking his signature for the 101st time, he lazily opened the black diary. He remembered, with a satisfied smirk, the dedication he'd penned on the flyleaf, to my loyal reader, Gilderoy Lockhart. Beneath the flourish, he'd even drawn a playful heart. Strangely, the rest of the diary was blank. Puzzled, he took up his quill and rewrote the sentence on the flyleaf. To my loyal reader, Gilderoy Lockhart. As soon as the quill left the page, the ink seemed to spread and move of its own accord, forming words. Hello, dear Gilderoy. Your signature is so ingenious. Every stroke reveals extraordinary taste. Lockhart sat bolt upright. Merlin's socks, a talking diary. He looked around to make sure no one had seen, then grinned and dipped his quill again. Of course, my signature style is meticulously designed. I must say, you have good taste. New handwriting flowed across the page, elegant and overflowing with what it claimed was admiration. Esteemed Mr. Lockhart, it is my great honor to be in the presence of your ink. Your signature is full of power and charm, just as you yourself displayed fearless bravery in traveling with trolls. Lockhart blinked in surprise, pride quickly replacing astonishment. Ha! A surprise gift from some ardent admirer. Gilderoy Lockhart, your charm is simply irresistible. Eagerly he wrote on. The quill danced across the paper. Allow me to formally introduce myself. Gilderoy Lockhart, Hogwarts' most popular Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. As he wrote, he thought, a talking diary and a fan. This was a gift from the gods of publicity, perhaps an Easter egg chapter for his next autobiography. At the very least, it was the perfect confidant. He hesitated only once. This diary had belonged to that red-haired Weasley girl. Should he obliviate her to avoid complications later? His fingers tapped the paper. Then he shook his head. No, he would explore this magical little book thoroughly first. Life at Hogwarts settled back into routine. Sagres took Harry wandering through the castle after classes every day, searching persistently for the entrance they still hadn't found. Meanwhile, Lockhart, after several insistent appeals, had convinced Dumbledore to approve his perfect idea, a dueling club. A gilded parchment was tacked to the notice board, announcing time, place, and that all students were welcome. Whether a basilisk would be dueling or not was irrelevant. This was an opportunity for Lockhart to perform before the young wizards, and he had rehearsed the scene of his triumphant victory in his head 1,000 times. He was certain this would win him many more admirers. After classes that day, Harry surprisingly asked Sagres for a leave of absence. His two friends planned to attend the dueling club, and he didn't want to miss it. Much to everyone's surprise, Malfoy, despite being in detention, requested the same. Sagres was reluctant, but did not refuse. In his opinion, Lockhart, outwardly flamboyant but utterly incompetent, liked to introduce flashy novelties at Hogwarts. A dueling club, he thought. Tonight, he would see what these young wizards were really made of, and he might even teach Lockhart a lesson. The dueling club was set for 8 o'clock in the Great Hall. When students arrived, the long tables had been cleared away to make room for a gilded stage. Hundreds of floating candles lit the hall as brightly as noon, and the ceiling rippled with a deep, starry river. The place was packed with teachers and students, wands at the ready, excitement thick in the air. "Who do you think will be teaching us tonight?" Hermione asked on tiptoe, voice quivering with excitement. "It must be Professor Flitwick," she answered herself quickly. "He was a dueling champion in his youth. There's no one better." Ron scratched his hair. "But you need 2 people to duel, don't you? How can one person demonstrate? Are they going to duel their own shadow?" "Anyone but Snape," Harry said, tone unmistakably disdainful. Ron grinned. "Hey, you didn't forget Lockhart, did you? Weren't you saying last time that he's your latest nightmare?" Harry's face fell. All right. Anyone but Snape and Lockhart." He lowered his voice. "Actually, I hope it's Professor Greengrass. He's a good duelist, but he's been busy lately, so I doubt it." "Speaking of that," Ron leaned in conspiratorially, "is he really learning Parseltongue from you? Why would a professor learn that?" Harry shook his head. "He said it was to be prepared, but I don't know what he means exactly." He stopped, distracted by the ostentatious decorations on the stage, gilded railings, floating ribbons, and erupting magical fireworks. A sense of foreboding swept over him. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Lockhart swept onto the stage in a scarlet robe embroidered with gold, striding like a peacock. Harry, Ron, and Hermione groaned in unison. Even worse, a shadow gravitated beside him, greasy black hair and a hooked nose. Professor Snape. Whispers rippled through the great hall. Lockhart pointed his wand to amplify his voice with sonorous, but the first attempt produced a strangled duck-like sound. After 2 clumsy tries, the spell finally took. "Quiet! Please be quiet." He waved dramatically and announced in what he clearly thought was a bubbly, perfect voice. "Although you already know me, I would like to give a brief introduction. I, Gilderoy Lockhart, your Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League, 5-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award, though I never boast, because I don't rely on smiles to ward off the ghouls of Warlin, and as the author of Traveling with Ghouls, I am also." The students exchanged looks. After more than half a term with him, anyone who wasn't a troll could see the professor's true abilities. Lockhart misread the whispering as admiration and beamed on. "As you can all see," Lockhart trilled, "Headmaster Dumbledore has specially approved the formation of this dueling club so you may master the art of self-defense, just as I described in Magical Me. For more detailed case studies, of course, I recommend purchasing my complete works." For the next half hour, the great hall echoed with Lockhart's endless self-praise. Only when yawns began to ripple through the audience did he reluctantly point behind him and, in 10 seconds flat, introduce Professor Snape. "Oh, right. I almost forgot. This is Professor Snape. He claims to know a thing or two about dueling and is honored to assist me with the demonstration." Lockhart flashed his dazzling smile. "But rest assured, I will be careful and won't harm a single hair on your dear potions, Professor." "I actually hope something goes wrong," Ron muttered to Harry. "Preferably, they both get injured and end up in the infirmary for a few days. Preferably until the end of term," Harry added, unable to help himself. At last, the two professors took their places. Lockhart made an exaggerated bow, tracing elaborate, showy flourishes with his hands as if greeting royalty. Snape, by contrast, gave one impatient, almost insulting shake of his greasy head. "Watch closely," Lockhart said, holding his wand upright against his chest like a sword. "A formal duel requires a bow first, then holding the wand like this." He turned to Snape. "We will cast our first spells on the count of 3. Of course, this is only a demonstration. Neither of us will be in any real danger." A cold sneer formed on Snape's face, and a dangerous glint flickered in his dark eyes. The students held their breath. They doubted Lockhart's competence. What they wondered was whether Snape might accidentally make that incompetence permanent. 1, 2, 3. Both professors flicked their wands at once, and Snape's low voice sounded on the count. "Expelliarmus!" A bright red jet burst from his wand and struck Lockhart square in the chest. With a dull thud, Lockhart flew like a rag doll, tracing a pathetic arc through the air before crashing into the stone wall about 5 meters away. His wand spun through the air, shot from his hand so fast no one quite caught it. "Merlin's beard!" Ron gasped, clutching his chest. "That must have hurt." Harry stood on tiptoe to see. "Looks worse than it is, I hope." Hermione only shook her head, lips twitching as she turned away. Lockhart lay curled against the wall, his long golden hair plastered across his face. For a moment he might have pretended to be unconscious to cover the embarrassment, but instead he struggled up, robes dusted with grit, his once perfect hair now a tangled mess. "Ahem, as you can all see." He stumbled back onto the stage, voice trembling. "This is the famous Expelliarmus. As the name suggests, its effect is to, my wand. Where's my wand? Has anyone seen my wand?" A dark raven swooped down out of nowhere, clutching the ornate gem-studded wand in its beak and circling over Lockhart's head. "Hey, give it back!" Lockhart danced and flailed like a clown. "You blasted bird! That's a limited edition wand." Eventually, Lockhart gave up the chase, forced a smile, and turned back to the students. "That's right. This was precisely the demonstration Professor Snape and I designed. I voluntarily took that spell to give you a clearer idea of the Expelliarmus." He stopped as Sagres strode in through the great hall doors and made straight for the center of the stage. Lockhart's voice trailed off. Sagres didn't so much as blink at him. One cold look froze Lockhart solid. "You," Sagres said, tapping his wand lightly, "stand over there." Lockhart forced an even more forced smile and shuffled over to Snape's side. The sight of them together looked like two enemies shoved into the same funeral pew. Sagres flicked his chin up. The raven swooped and dropped the wand neatly into Lockhart's trembling hand. "If you're going to teach dueling," Sagres said, voice cold and serious, "teach the whole thing." The great hall erupted. Students pushed forward on their toes, eyes shining. Professor Flitwick scuttled to the front row. McGonagall's spectacles flashed with interest. Madame Pomfrey bustled up, clutching her medical pouch and muttering, "Merlin preserve us." "Before you wave your wand, remember 3 words." Sagres lightly twirled his wand, drawing 3 thin scarlet lines in the air. "Attack, defense, evade." He scanned the eager faces and his voice sharpened. The essence of dueling is the dynamic cycle of those 3. Attack, defense, evasion, not a turn-based game of casting spells alternately. No sooner had he spoken than his wand burst into dazzling light. 6 streams of colored spell light shot out in arcs, weaving together like a lethal net. 2 against 1, Sagres said over the whoosh of magic. "First, teach them how to evade." Snape's face went as dark as the dungeons. He rolled aside with a speed that barely seemed human and narrowly avoided the converging lights. It wasn't eagerness to cooperate with Sagres so much as necessity. The intertwined magical energies were something a simple shield charm couldn't hold against. 1 or 2 might be manageable, but 6 were too many. Lockhart, however, lacked such agility. He struck another ridiculous defensive pose and was hit square in the chest again by a red beam, sent hurtling backwards. Evade! Sagres's voice boomed through the hall. With a flick of his wand, he tugged Lockhart out of the air and plonked him back where he'd been standing, like a puppet obediently returned to its place. To evade is to avoid spells by movement, by taking cover, or by predicting trajectories. If you don't want to be a living target in a duel, do not stand there like a wooden stake. Before anyone could reply, Sagres spun his wand once more. Thousands of tiny magical birds, glowing constructs, whistled into being around him. They gave piercing cries and swept toward the two professors like a blizzard. Now, a defensive demonstration. Snape reacted instantly. He drew a perfect circle with his wand in the air, and a silver shield charm sprang up. The flock of magical birds slammed into it, erupting in a spray of bangs and sparks. Lockhart beside him was not so fortunate. The birds struck him like stones. He scrambled, hands to his head, his screams mingling with their squawks. The meticulous golden coiffure he'd spent so long on became a nest, and his face quickly swelled and bruised. The core of defense lies in neutralizing threats. Sagres's voice cut through the chaos. From protective charms to counterspells, the choice depends on the situation. While defending, you must also be accumulating strength. Otherwise, you'll get trapped in endless passive defense. Snape drew another circle with his wand. A surge of power gathered behind the shield. A ruthless light flashed in his eyes, and he thrust his wand forward. A stream of spell light shot toward Sagres. Lastly, offense. Sagres flicked his wand, tracing a silver arc. The aggressive spell struck an invisible barrier and fizzled harmlessly away. Offensive magic isn't only about causing harm. It's any spell that breaks defenses and creates openings. His voice carried clearly through the great hall as two thick red jets of light burst from his wand tip. Snape's pupils pinched. He waved his wand so hard he barely managed to block one of them. His black robes whipped around him. Lockhart, meanwhile, was hit again and spun out like a rag doll. Expelliarmus can disarm an opponent, but remember, Sagres said, snapping his fingers. Lockhart was yanked back toward the stage as if on an invisible string. A wizard without a wand is still dangerous. Ouagadougou graduates, for example, pass assessments by wandless casting. He continued, sending a pair of spells that moved with such speed they needed no audible incantation. Petrificus totalis and stupefy, he explained as the spells flew. They can restrict movement without killing. Excellent control tools for young wizards. Snape had to abandon the counterspell he was preparing and hastily raised another shield. The two spells collided against it in a burst of sparks, and the impact shoved Snape back half a step. Lockhart, however, did not even scream this time. The moment the spell hit him, his entire body locked into a ridiculous posture. One leg absurdly raised, arms thrust forward, face frozen in terror, like a very bad piece of modern sculpture. The young wizards in the hall watched with shining eyes, breath forgotten. They had never seen a duel like this. Spells exploding on the stage like fireworks, each display accompanied by precise tactical commentary. Many students mimicked movements with their fingers, only withdrawing them sheepishly when they saw Lockhart's battered face and mussed hair. Sagres's wand seemed to be an inexhaustible fountain. He explained calmly as he casually unleashed a torrent of colorful magic. Snape struggled beneath it, his robe flapping like a trapped bat. The few counterspells he managed were effortlessly neutralized. "Pay attention," Sagres said, his voice unruffled by the magical cacophony. "Professor Snape is demonstrating various evasive and defensive techniques, which will be a major focus of your studies. It may look messy, but it's effective and practical." With a light tap of his wand, the stage floor rose into a stone wall, perfectly blocking Snape's hastily cast stupefy. A second gesture, and the wall shimmered into a sky full of butterflies that obscured vision while scattering glittering scales. Snape used a scouring charm to clear them, but the butterflies abruptly transformed into a storm of sharp spikes and swarmed at him. Snape's wand hand trembled as he threw up Protego again. Sagres kept changing the battlefield. He twirled his wand, and a crimson beam lanced diagonally across the stage. Snape lunged to one side and ducked behind an obstacle. Lockhart, still petrified, stood like a ridiculous statue directly in the path. Transfiguration is not just turning teacups into mice, Sagres continued as the raised walls shifted shape. If used cleverly, every brick and stone on the battlefield becomes a weapon or a shield. He thrust his wand forward. A torrent of transformed bricks roared out and exploded in the center of the stage. The young wizards screamed and clapped their hands over their ears as two silvery, snake-like ropes shot from the smoke, wrapping around the exhausted Snape like a mummy and binding the still-stiff Lockhart as well. When the dust cleared, Sagres was smoothing his sleeves, as if the entire demonstration had been little more than a stroll in the park. "Remember," he said, his voice reaching every stunned student, wizard dueling is not a static exchange of spells. It's a three-dimensional game of movement, evasion, defensive neutralization, and offensive suppression. Victory depends on three things. He walked slowly across the stage, ignoring Snape's grim expression and focusing on the students. He raised a finger. First, magical power, which determines whether you can sustain high-intensity continuous casting. He raised another finger. Second, your spell repertoire, which determines whether you can adapt to a rapidly changing battlefield. One more finger. Third, tactical foresight, which decides whether you are the hunter or the hunted. He stopped at the edge of the stage and looked down at the eager faces below. True masters blur the lines between those three. Their spells combine offense and defense and shift constantly. Of course, that level is far from where you are now. He reached out and touched Lockhart's forehead with the tip of his wand. A thread of light twined into Lockhart's mind. The statue loosened, transformed back into a very human, very embarrassed man. His knees gave out and he fell to the floor. "I will apply to Dumbledore to take over this club," Sagres said, standing tall on the stage. "If I'm approved, I will teach you real skills." Ignoring the cheering, he then knelt with casual elegance and drew his wand in a shallow, swift arc across the throat of both professors. No blood was drawn, but the throat-slitting gesture sent chills through every young wizard in the hall. "One last point for today," Sagres said, his voice low but clear. "Always remember to finish them off." His wand paused for the barest moment at Snape's temple, especially when dealing with someone who wants to take your life. He rose, met Snape's furious glare without flinching, snapped his fingers, and the ropes around the two professors vanished. "I hope I'm the one to teach you this lesson, not your enemies." Chapter 86, Duel Tutorial, Part 2. Snape's fingertips still trembled uncontrollably. The muscles in his arm beneath his robe spasmed from overuse. He had never felt magic drain from him so clearly, like a dried-up marsh, where even the simplest lumos was hard to force. Though a hot, unrelenting anger still burned in his chest, cold reason reminded him of the bitter truth. The duel had exposed an insurmountable gulf between them. Perhaps even years ago, when the opponent had still been a Hogwarts student, Snape would already have been outmatched. Only today's public, execution-like display had shown him the man's true power, the flawless rhythm of his casting, the effortless control of his magic, and the frightening skill with which he combined teaching with practical combat. Snape narrowed his eyes as realization settled in. Such strength would make him more than qualified to be a Dark Lord. And yet, Sagres had chosen to return to Hogwarts as a professor. Snape's gaze swept over the fanatical students below the stage, and a suspicion took shape. Was Sagres building a faction here to seize power, or was there something in this 1,000-year-old school worth scheming for? On the other side of the stage, Lockhart lay unconscious in an exaggerated pose. If not for the occasional twitch of his eyelids, he might have looked genuinely dead. Sagres cast a quick detection charm, then raised an eyebrow at the school healer standing to the side. "Madame Pomfrey, I think we require a rather specific restorative." Madame Pomfrey nodded, producing from deep in her kit a bottle of potion foaming with an eerie green froth. When the stench of rotten eggs spread through the air, Lockhart suddenly coughed violently. The defense against the dark arts professor was helped away for treatment, and Snape returned to his seat to recover. Sagres remained on the stage, nodding to the eager students below. "The demonstration ends here. The practical session begins." A roar of cheers filled the great hall. After watching for so long, they were finally going to try things themselves. Sagres tapped his wand against his palm and, smiling faintly at the students, warned, First, whoever turns a duel into a street brawl. Sparks erupted from the tip of his wand, and the noisy hall went instantly silent. He did not need to spell out the consequences. Everyone knew they would be unpleasant. He traced a few arcs through the air with his wand, and the floor of the great hall rippled as if across water. The space expanded, and stone pillars rose to divide the floor into dozens of dueling platforms. Slytherin versus Gryffindor, Ravenclaw versus Hufflepuff. Form your teams and take your positions immediately, his voice carried to every corner. The students stirred as if struck by a tide of excitement. Harry and Ron huddled together. Malfoy dragged Crabbe and Goyle after him. Hermione was demonstrating proper dueling stances to Neville, and Luna had already pulled Astoria toward a platform. Sagres stepped onto an invisible staircase and rose into midair, his black robes a shadow in the candlelight. First lesson, he announced from the suspended central platform, casting and dodging are not two separate actions, but a single, coordinated breath. He paced the platform. I don't expect you to perform subtle magic in this lesson, but there is one requirement. Aim at your target, cast your spell, and then dodge the counterattack. But Professor, a Hufflepuff student raised a timid hand. We don't know very many spells yet. Sagres regarded the bewildered faces and said calmly, I am familiar with Hogwarts curriculum, but I also know many of you keep nasty jinxes in reserve. Use them. Today is a good time to test them. He paused. If you truly cannot attack, at least learn to dodge like a rabbit. But what about the rules of dueling? Penelope Clearwater, the Ravenclaw prefect, asked. We don't even know the formal bowing procedures. Rules, Sagres said. The purpose of the dueling club is to give you the skill to survive danger, not to teach theatricalities. He flicked his wand. A red light zipped past the questioner's ear. Discard those elaborate gestures. On a battlefield, they will only mark you out as targets. A quiet murmur rose. Hogwarts is so safe. Why learn this at all? Hogwarts may not be as safe as you think, Sagres replied coolly. With a single motion, he conjured a huge snake of brackish, smoky magic that slid through the crowd. For a moment, the students stiffened, then relaxed when they realized the serpent had no substance. I spent 2 years at Durmstrang, he continued. There, dueling and knowledge of the dark arts are essential. In those matters, you are far behind. The spectral snake opened its enormous maw and seemed to swallow the students one by one before evaporating into a curl of smoke. Still, it does not matter. I am giving you an opportunity. Prove to me you are not useless. Over 30 dueling teams formed across the platforms, some 3 to 5 in a group, others standing alone. When Sagres waved his wand to start the session, the great hall erupted. The students became a disturbed hornet's nest, flinging spells at the opposition without worrying about finesse, only volume. Scourgify! Screamed a first-year Hufflepuff, and a Ravenclaw girl opposite broke into bubbles as soap suds covered her robes. What kind of attack is that? Someone shouted. I only learned that one. Harry, Ron, and Hermione formed a back-to-back trio surrounded by several older Gryffindors. Hermione had been hesitant, but when a Densaggio sprayed a classmate's hair, she snapped. Expulso, she barked. Stupefy, came another voice. Incarcerus, a third. Petrificus totalis, rictus empra fiery. She hurled spell after spell, her wand a blur as jinxes blasted toward the opposing line. Her fierce offensive, however, drew immediate retaliation. 3 jinxes came at her at once. Harry lunged and dragged her clear, but Ron was less fortunate. His wand snapped with a sickening crack and a puff of green smoke, and a deflected spell struck him square in the face. Ugh! Ron bent double as slugs started streaming from his mouth. Ron! Hermione cried, but the next moment she had to roll aside to avoid a Tarantallegra that detonated where she had been standing. Sagres had deliberately created distance between opponents to prevent the exercise from descending into a brawl, but he had underestimated the students' inventiveness. Several Slytherins and Gryffindors charged one another, and the spell duel immediately spilled into a shoving match. Take that! Kick! Ow! Why are you pulling my hair? Let go! Who's choking me? Sagres' mouth twitched. With a flick of his wand, several silver lights flashed and pulled the grappling students apart. He raised his hand and called a halt to the melee. Looking around the hall, he allowed himself the faintest hint of approval. Far better than he'd expected. At least 80% of the students had remembered to cast while moving, instead of standing still like targets. "Not bad," he said slowly, a trace of satisfaction in his voice. "At least you didn't blow up the Great Hall." Beside him, Ron spat another slug. Sagres waved his wand, and small trails of healing magic shot forth, mending the students who had been struck by jinxes one by one. "For close quarters combat, 2 points will be deducted from each person," Professor Sagres said flatly. "I repeat, wizard dueling is not a street brawl. If I see anyone biting again, I'll throw them into the Black Lake." "But Professor, didn't you say we should abandon all rules?" George Weasley grinned, rubbing his torn robe without looking up. "Gryffindor, 5 points," Sagres added without emotion. "For ears that only hear what they want." Malfoy, nursing a bruised arm, sniggered. In the chaos, he'd managed a low blow on Potter, and in the confusion, Crabbe had landed one on him as well, though Crabbe would never admit it. Sagres gave a small, precise flick of his wand, and the Great Hall began to stitch itself back together. Crooked candelabras righted, scorched floorboards renewed, and even the slimy puddle of slugs by Ron's feet vanished as if it had never been. "That's all for today." Sagres glanced at the clock in the corner. It was almost curfew. "Prefects, take your houses back to their common rooms. Anyone caught wandering will get a month's detention." The students dispersed like a receding tide. Within minutes, the teacher's table was empty. Sagres lingered a moment, then decided to spend the night in the library. Lockhart, however, lurched into his office, the door slamming behind him. He staggered to the gilded mirror and flinched at his reflection. His carefully arranged curls were in wild disarray, as if a cannonball had struck them, and green smears of some healing potion clung to the corners of his mouth, leaving a taste like rotten swill. "Too much? Too much!" he snapped, flinging the crystal vase on his desk toward the fireplace. It shattered with a sharp crack as glass skittered into the flames. "Sagres, that vile bastard! How dare he? How dare he treat Gilderoy Lockhart like this?" he muttered, pacing in front of the mirror, dragon-hide boots leaving deep impressions in the Persian rug. Something compelled him to open his notebook. He picked up his quill and began to write in a jittery scrawl. "Today I was ambushed in the dueling club. Snape, that filthy old bat, came at me from behind and ruined my 50-galleon hair potion, and he rolled his eyes at me more than once." He hesitated. The ink bled into a black blotch that looked very much like his twisted expression. "Snape is unbearable. Nobody likes him." Lockhart nodded as if seeking confirmation, then continued in a painfully ornate hand. "And that despicable Sagres, he actually teamed up with Snape against me. I fought with everything I had, but 2 against 1 is unfair. They defeated me. They're jealous of my fame and talent, like fireflies jealous of the sun. A bunch of petty scoundrels." His hand trembled as he pushed the pen on. "Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. They're jealous of my brilliance. That's why they try to undermine and humiliate me. Yes, but, unfortunately, they succeeded." A new urge seized him and he scrawled on. "What can I do? What will my fans think? So many students watched today. Will they think Lockhart is nothing but a show-off?" "You need a new accomplishment, something greater." Lockhart stared at the line. "New achievements? What achievement? Write another book. I'm at Hogwarts. There are no opportunities, no material." The handwriting on the page shifted, elegant and almost serpentine. "Esteemed Lockhart, you forget, you do not only write books. You are a great wizard. There are many other ways to reclaim your honor." Lockhart frowned, then scribbled, "Other ways? What ways?" "For example, solving the Chamber of Secrets crisis." The name made Lockhart's face go pale. "The Chamber of Secrets? A basilisk in there. It's too dangerous. And anyway, who even knows where the chamber is?" The ink wavered and then flickered with promise. "I happen to know some clues to the chamber's entrance, and I know how to subdue the basilisk. I will help you. Imagine the headlines when you stride out ahead of everyone, holding the basilisk's head." Lockhart's breathing quickened, and his spectacles flashed. He could already see the Daily Prophet's banner. Gilderoy Lockhart single-handedly saves Hogwarts. He swallowed, and his trembling quill danced back across the page. "How? I can't look into a basilisk's eyes. That's fatal. I don't even know the chamber's location." The handwriting slowed, almost as if it were drawing breath. "Don't worry. I have a way to make the basilisk as tame as a kitten, but I need your help. I'm only a humble diary. Without your cooperation, I can do nothing. Lockhart sat very still, making a decision. Can we really solve the Chamber of Secrets problem? Of course. For a great practitioner such as you, combined with my modest knowledge, the chamber will be nothing. Then you will announce the truth to the world and save the school. A new heroic epic. All yours. I only ask to be mentioned as a small footnote in your legend. Tell me exactly what to do, Lockhart wrote. The ink grew faint and the words formed slowly. Maintaining this kind of communication requires energy. As a magic object, I need power to operate, and I also need a little blood to find the answers for you. Lockhart's fingertip brushed the page, and the edge of the paper cut him. A tiny wound bled. The moment a drop of blood touched the parchment, the ink leapt back to life. Lockhart's knees gave out, and he collapsed across his desk, his quill slipping from his fingers. When he managed to sit up and lift the quill again, his writing was jagged. I feel so tired. This is just creative fatigue, the diary reassured him. Do you want to know the true entrance to the Chamber of Secrets? Of course, that fool Sagres searches for it every day. I could have that answer without much effort, because you are far more outstanding than he is. I will tell you, but you must give me something first. What do you want? He wrote. A little blood. Only a little. Didn't I already give blood? Lockhart asked. Puzzled. You did not. Give a little, and I can make you a hero. A real hero. Lockhart took his quill and cut his finger again. This time the blood soaked into the page faster. From somewhere deep in the notebook came a contented sigh. He attributed his sudden weariness to the strain of concocting new chapters. He fell into a heavy sleep, the diary open before him. In the quiet of the night, the words on the page planted furtive thoughts in his mind, like tiny seeds taking root. Why does that scar-headed boy always turn up where the trouble begins? Could he be the one who opened the Chamber of Secrets? The professor's so-called protective measures are mere token gestures, utterly ineffectual. Only we understand the truth. Only we have the real solution. Those poisonous suggestions wound their way into Lockhart's imagination. By morning, there was already an odd edge to him, an unaccountable hostility towards Sagres, and a strange, eerie confidence glinting behind his spectacles. Morning light filtered through the stained glass windows and fell across the stone corridor. Sagres had just come from the library when he collided with a pallid Lockhart. Dark circles pooled under Lockhart's eyes, and his once perfect curls hung limp and lifeless. He looked like someone who'd escaped from Azkaban. Lockhart shot him a frosty look as they passed. Sagres inwardly scoffed. Was that the best he could do? He still had an entire warehouse of lesson plans he hadn't even opened. If the man wanted to play ignorant, Sagres thought, he could very neatly tear off this supposed legendary wizard's varnished smile. In the classroom, Sagres' eyebrow rose at the sight of nearly twice the usual number of students, clearly the dueling club's ripple effect. He walked to the podium, tapped his wand, and sent several colored beams of light arcing toward the walls. The beams reflected back, striking invisible, precisely formed barriers he created in the air with barely a flick of his wrist. The barriers appeared and vanished in an instant, catching or shattering the light with sharp, crystalline sounds. The students' eyes widened. The newcomers knew their visit had been worth it. When the lights died away, Sagres' voice cut through the hush, cool and exacting. Do you see? The obstacle curse isn't a clumsy shield. It's an extension of your will. If you use it flexibly, the obstacle can move, act, and become your weapon. He waved, and the lesson's theory bloomed in the air. The obstacle curse isn't a uniform wall. Its magical structure is malleable. The center can be dense to take a strong blow, the edges viscous to deflect or delay spells. A translucent, jelly-like barrier shifted and reformed, finally stretching into a net that nearly spanned the classroom. He invited the students to touch it and feel its resilience. Where your will is, the barrier is. Think, block the front, and it plants itself there. Think, protect the right shoulder, and it condenses over your right shoulder. Think, deflect that red light, and it does it. He guided the net to shrink and split into tiny barriers that darted around the students' bodies like living things. Shrink its structure, increase its speed, and it becomes a weapon. The tiny barriers hardened and snapped into the students' foreheads with the thud of transparent rubber. leaving them dizzy and blinking. Extend its structure, slow it down, and it can hinder your opponent's movements. The spell relaxed and softened, wrapping around palms and making fists stubborn to close or open. He flicked his wand, a thick beam of spell light hurtled toward them. While the students were still reacting, the many barriers merged into one, bent into a curve, and rebounded the spell exactly as it had struck. He then flicked up a smaller, tilted barrier beside him that caught the returned blast, the force of which slid him an elegant step aside. See? Waste utilization. The opponent's magic does half your work for you. He stowed his wand, and the illusions dissolved. It can deflect attacks, but only with practice. Without proficiency, it's like a failed potion, random direction, unpredictable results. A ripple of laughter ran through the room at the jab. Sagres dissected every movement from wrist angle to the instantaneous surge of magic. 2 hours passed, his throat felt as dry as a salamander's tongue, and the students' eyes were bloodshot from concentration. Spells, he reminded them, weren't learned by listening alone. These theories had to be honed through repeated practice. "All right," he said at last, clapping his hands. "Next session is practical. Your task during the break is simple. Cast a working obstacle curse. That's your baseline. I've taught you everything you need to know. The rest is repetition." He dismissed them and left without looking back. In the great hall, he checked the magical mirror out of habit. The image was as calm as ever. Around the corner toward the library, a scream, piercing and mingled with wicked cheers, split the air. "Ha! Run away!" Sagres narrowed his eyes, slid his wand into his hand, and froze like a coiled leopard. He scanned the shadows between the pillars, no cold scales of a basilisk, only a familiar, ridiculous sight. Knickerbockers and a rusty, triumphant voice. Peeves. Hanging upside down from a huge crystal chandelier, Peeves grinned and flung balls of muck at the scurrying students. The mud stank and slopped with comic accuracy, students shrieking as it splattered them. Peeves crowed like a referee. 10 points! Another 10 points! Terrible dodging! Penalized for dodging! He spun on the chandelier, laughing and delighted. Sagres allowed a cold smile. "Chaos storm," he murmured. His wand sliced the air. A compact gray whirlwind sprang into being and wrapped Peeves tight like a precisely set trap. The cackling broke into terrified squeals as Peeves became a blurred gray smear in the spinning eddy, hat nearly torn off. "Wah! Let me down!" The students, who a moment before had been fleeing and shrieking, froze and stared. Peeves caught like this, restrained, helpless, was unprecedented. For a heartbeat there was silence, then cheering and applause as the mud-soaked victims stamped their feet in glee. Peeves feared only the bloody Baron. Sagres remembered his first 2 years at Hogwarts when he'd been helpless against the poltergeist. Experience had taught him the key. Peeves was the living embodiment of the castle's chaos, and to suppress him, you had to match that chaos with an equal, controlled disorder. It wasn't a cure, but it made Peeves manageable for a while. From his inner robe pocket, Sagres drew a thick crystal bottle, aimed its mouth at the spinning storm, and tapped once with his wand. The whirlwind and its frantic occupant were sucked into the bottle with a whoosh, a wisp of dense smoke vanishing into glass. Peeves's face slapped against the smooth inside with a dull thump. "Looks like you need to calm down," Sagres said, tapping the bottle wall gently. Peeves's voice shot up 8 octaves in a wordless howl. "Mercy, Professor! Great Professor! I'll call you Principal! Let me out!" Sagres shook the bottle. Peeves's screeches echoed down the corridor, shrill and pleading. This was a hostage. He intended to escort the poltergeist to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and see whether the crying ghost could be coaxed into revealing anything useful about the Chamber of Secrets. 89. Snake monster out of the cage. A long time had passed since the first attack, and the truth about the second had been carefully suppressed by the headmaster and the professors. Gradually, the Chamber of Secrets legend became nothing more than gossip among the students, and Professor McGonagall's mandatory rule about wearing protective glasses provoked its share of complaints. Once the novelty wore off, glasses were shoved up onto foreheads or hung casually from collars in the corridors, only reluctantly replaced when the professor's stern eyes swept by. Percy Weasley stood in the corridor, surveying the second years as they came out of potions. At the hint of his disapproving glare, The students obediently pulled their spectacles back into place. The mixed smells of toad guts and wormwood still hung in the air. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were swept along in the flow of people, weighed down with heavy books, moving slowly with the crowd. A faint, rasping sound, like fingernails scraping rotten wood, cut through laughter and footsteps and slid into Harry's ears. He stopped so abruptly that Ron almost tripped over him. Harry's face went ashen. He hadn't heard that sound in a very long time. "What's wrong, Harry?" Ron muttered, annoyed. Hermione looked at him, puzzled. "Shh!" Harry raised a finger and tilted his head, listening intently. "That sound. I think it's—" "What sound?" Hermione scanned the bustling passage. Dozens of students from two houses jostled together. The clatter of books and chatter made it hard to hear anything. "It's too noisy. You must have imagined it." Harry didn't answer. He bent lower, his ear almost against the wall. Caw! A harsh, piercing cry exploded overhead. The three of them looked up and saw Sargeras's raven, Loctus, perched on a high windowsill, its feathers flashing a cold, metallic glint. Sharp-eyed students crowded round excitedly. Harry straightened, forced a smile to Ron and Hermione. "Maybe I did mishear. It's noisy." "I told you it was a false alarm," Ron breathed, visibly relieved, and pushed his glasses back up. Hermione, fingers fiddling with her lenses, still looked worried. "It doesn't hurt to be cautious. Isn't Professor Greengrass still investigating? We can tell him about this suspected situation this afternoon." "Okay," Harry said after a moment. "Let's tell him later. For now, to the tower. We need to put away our books. I'm starving." They drifted toward the windowsill to get a better look at the rare raven. Someone produced owl food. Loctus barely glanced at it and turned its head with an air of disdain. "He eats iron," Seamus announced. "That doesn't look like iron," Neville said uncertainly. "Say something!" Parvati Patil cried, eager. Loctus cocked its small black head and stared at her with bright eyes. "Quiet," it rasped. The hoarse voice scraped like sandpaper. The students fell back a step and then clambered closer again. "Does he only know that one phrase?" Dean Thomas asked, disappointed. "Probably." Seamus reached out tentatively to touch the raven's metallic-looking feathers. Loctus snapped its neck back, dodging his hand, and opened its beak. "Idiot!" The watching students froze, red-faced with embarrassment. "Well," Dean said dryly, "at least his vocabulary isn't only one word." Loctus looked over the crowd, a faint gurgling coming from its throat. "What does he eat, anyway?" "Mithril," Hermione said without hesitation. "Professor Greengrass feeds him that." "Must cost a fortune," Ron muttered. At that moment, Malfoy, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, pushed through the throng, fishing a small handful of glittering mithril from his pocket and holding it out toward the bird with an expression of smug triumph. Loctus ignored the offering, continuing to scan the corridor. "Food. Slaughter," it croaked. An inhuman, soul-chilling hiss filled Harry's ear, and then a thunderous crash, the sound of a wall being smashed in, tore through the passage. Rubble sprayed like rain. Through the rising dust, something massive and terrifying surged out of the broken wall, a presence that seemed to suck the air from the corridor. Everyone froze. A gigantic snake, thoughtless and brutal, uncoiled itself into the passage. Its scales were thick and plated, its head enormous and hideous, almost scraping the corridor's vaulted ceiling. But the worst thing were its eyes, molten gold with vertical slits, pupils like lamps of death that held an awful, freezing power. The snake launched at the nearest figure and bit down. Crash! The thing it struck shattered. Only then did everyone see that what had been bitten was a mirrored corner of the castle. The student had been a reflection in cold, cracked glass. The fragments of mirror flew, and the sound was like a body hitting stone. A wave of terror rolled through the students. The snake's gaze swept the corridor, and wherever its terrible yellow light fell, life seemed to stop. A Slytherin girl stooping to pick up a dropped book froze with her fingers a centimeter from the parchment, turned to stone. Two Gryffindor boys, arm in arm, their smiles fixed in startled surprise, became statue-shed tilted, mouths open. The ring of students around Loctus looked up and were petrified mid-motion, a dozen lifelike gray figures standing in a ghastly circle. A Gryffindor who had fallen to the floor raised his wand in a last desperate attempt. A thin spark flared at the tip and then vanished as his body turned to cold stone. A Slytherin who tried to run reacted too slowly. He glanced back and was frozen in a twisted, terrified posture. In an instant, the lively corridor had become a graveyard of stone figures. Only the heavy, fetid breathing of the serpent and the fall of loose rubble broke the silence. Harry dropped his head instinctively as the snake appeared, then shouted to the few students who had not yet been affected, "Don't look back! Run!" He grabbed Ron and Hermione, and they ran. Their feet hammered the empty corridor, echoes bouncing wildly. In the panic, Hermione's glasses clattered to the floor. She had no time to retrieve them. Behind them, Harry heard the sickening scrape of scales against stone, the sound of the beast closing in, like a countdown. Fear seized Hermione. She could not help herself. She turned to look. The raven shot past her face. Its talons slashed across her eyes. Blood spurted. "Ah!" Hermione screamed and clapped her hands to her face. "Hermione!" Harry's first impulse was to turn back, but Ron shoved him hard. "Go!" he barked. "Find a professor!" Then he lunged toward Hermione, who was stumbling and crying out. Harry's heart felt hollow, but he forced himself to run on. Around the next bend, a group of students were coming the other way, laughing and talking, unaware. Harry waved his arms and shouted hoarsely, "Don't come in here! Get out!" His warning had the opposite effect. Several of them looked up, eyes drawn straight toward the deep, dark corridor where the basilisk coiled. For an instant, their faces registered horror, and then the petrifying gray closed over them. One by one, they became statues. Harry's stomach dropped into ice. He understood with a sudden, ruined clarity that in such terror, any abrupt sound or sight would snatch at people's attention. The basilisk's presence was too vast, too impossible to ignore. One look was all it took. 90. Chapter cremated and buried. Harry ran with his head down, but his mind was flooded with images of the petrified students. They were still alive, as long as they could be given the potion. The thought was a lifeline, and then panic clutched his throat. Ron, Hermione, would they be attacked before they could be saved? Conflicting thoughts exploded in his head. A desperate, stupid idea even flashed through him. Use Parseltongue? Try to control it? Drive it away? He suppressed the urge to turn back and kept running. No, this wasn't just about him. He had to find a professor, find the headmaster. The decision bit at him worse than the fear of the basilisk. He had always hated the idea of fleeing, but now he had to leave his friends behind and get help. Sagres gripped the crystal bottle in his left hand. Inside, Peeves thudded against the glass, letting out muffled curses that only made his prison rattle louder. His steps were steady and purposeful as he headed for Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. The stairs were empty, only faint quarrels echoed from distant corridors. Then a cold, slimy, revolting aura rolled out from the corner of the hall like a visible tide. Sagres' pupils narrowed, his wand snapped into his palm, and he clenched the bottle tighter. Peeves shrank into a terrified ball at the same moment. Footsteps pounded closer, and a figure burst from around the corner and sprinted toward the stairs. It was Harry Potter. The other man saw him too. "Professor?" Harry froze, then pointed down the corridor and shouted, "Basilisk! It's in the corridor!" Sagres linked to Fawkes' vision, and dozens of stone statues filled his sight, frozen students, helpless and hard as stone. The basilisk was there too, its raw red mouth opening, teeth aimed at Ron and Hermione's backs. Sagres vanished from the stairwell and appeared in the middle of the corridor, fury replacing his usual calm. "Magic roar," he intoned, a low, lethal spell full of killing intent. A surge of power tore through the air like a spiraling shockwave, darker than the basilisk itself, gray-white magic coiling like a roaring maw. It slammed into the monster with crushing force. The corridor shuddered, wall hangings tore loose, the ceiling peeled away, and dust and plaster rained down. The basilisk was thrown against the stone and crashed like a rotten heap. Its great eyes were forced from their sockets, clinging by bloody tendons. Yellowish-white brain matter and blood gushed from its nostrils and mouth. Its enormous body split in many places. The stench of spilled innards and severed entrails filled the air. Even its proud scales were shattered, and chaotic magic seared its flesh like a raging blade. But it did not die. The 1,000-year-old beast's vitality was immense. Sagres stood in the center of the ruined corridor, eyes cold and hard. He flicked his wand. Soft beams of light burst from its tip and gently drew the stone statues, including Ron and Hermione, still reeling, behind him. The dying basilisk lashed out. Its massive head whipped around and sprayed a jet of dark green, foul-smelling venom like a high-pressure hose straight at Sargeras and the students behind him. He reacted quickly. With another wave of his wand, scattered metal armor in the corridor melted into molten iron and poured into the basilisk's gaping mouth. Then he thrust his wand forward again, and the venom midair hardened into daggers that shot back into the beast. The venom daggers ripped into the ruined body, but the basilisk gave a pained, vicious hiss and used its last strength to smash its tail into a nearby stained glass window. The great panes and the surrounding wall exploded. The creature twisted through the hole it had made and slithered into the courtyard below. Its bloody, serpentine bulk thudded onto the grounds and then fled into the darkness. Sargeras went to the gap in the wall and looked down at the trail the basilisk left, a twisting wake of blood and corrosive damage across the bushes. He turned and surveyed the ruined corridor and the rows of cold stone statues. "Everyone, put on your glasses at once. Stay inside." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the castle and reached every ear. He ignored the shaken Ron and Hermione for a moment, then transformed into a shadowing raven and shot out the hole toward the direction the basilisk had taken. The blind, trapped beast needed to be finished. Despite his surprise at the creature's resilience, he'd found its trail. The other professors arrived too. Snape intercepted the fleeing basilisk and hurled a brutal sectum sempra at its head, but the cutting curse left only a pale mark across its thick scales and, at most, severed one useless eyeball. Sargeras descended and, with a sweeping motion, unleashed swarms of burning fire ravens. The birds dove into the basilisk's shattered wounds and began to incinerate its innards from within. The monster writhed in agony. When it screamed, more fire ravens plunged into its open mouth. In the end, the creature was burned from the inside out, reduced to a charred, curled husk of scales. The basilisk was dead, but the greater shadow still loomed. The atmosphere of the Chamber of Secrets fell again over Hogwarts. Fear of the air returned, and the students remembered how vulnerable they'd been. Worse, Sargeras's potion supply was tiny compared to the scale of the petrification. He could spare only 2 drops, enough to heal Hermione's injured eyes, but helpless for the many others. Choosing only some to save felt unjust, no matter who decided. That potion was precious, restorative, curative, capable of undoing poisoning and curses. Dumbledore had a phoenix. Why hadn't Fawkes' tears been used? With so many victims, the incident could no longer be kept quiet. The Gringotts excavation scandal had already broken, and now the Hogwarts monster attack drew the public eye away from the Goblin affair. Dumbledore found himself in real trouble. When word spread that Draco Malfoy had been petrified, Lucius Malfoy arrived with other pureblood families and angrily carried his son away. The Daily Prophet brimmed with the story. Many parents demanded their children be taken home, and the Ministry of Magic sent letter after letter, most thinly veiled interrogations. In the infirmary, Sargeras stood expressionless in front of the rows of motionless students. Dumbledore and the professors pinned their hopes on Professor Sprout's mandrakes in the greenhouse maturing into a usable restorative draught. Sargeras watched them with puzzlement. Were homegrown mandrakes somehow safer to use? Couldn't ready-made mandrake potion be bought in Diagon Alley? One family taking a child home was one thing, but dozens of students lying stiff on hospital beds and everyone insisting on waiting for Hogwarts-grown, pollution-free draughts felt bewildering. Lucius had known to take Draco. Why couldn't the school get a bottle of restorative potion brewed from mandrakes somewhere else? Bad news kept arriving, but for Professor Sagres, most of it was not his concern. He was not headmaster. It was not his job to carry the school's burdens. Still, one thing compelled him to summon Harry and his friends to get to the bottom of it. "You mean Lockhart never appeared in the corridor? From beginning to end, you didn't see him meet the basilisk?" he asked. "No, Professor, we didn't see him at all," Harry answered. "I see." Sagres nodded once, letting his mind turn over the possibilities. Lockhart had disappeared. Since the basilisk attack the day before, he was the only person to have gone missing from the castle. Why? Had his luck finally run out and the basilisk swallowed him? If that were the case, there would be nothing left to find. Or had he run away? Was he the heir hidden in Hogwarts? Sagres found that unlikely. Lockhart's showy manner did not fit the patient secrecy a Slytherin heir would need. If he truly were the heir, he had concealed it too well. "Professor, is Lockhart?" Harry began hesitantly. Sagres raised an eyebrow. "Never mind," Harry trailed off. "No need to be afraid of telling me if you have any clues," Sagres said gently. "As for the whereabouts of your defense against the dark arts professor, we will find that out in time." "Will Hogwarts really be closed?" Ron blurted, worried. "The Daily Prophet says." "That is not for you to worry about, Mr. Singh Weasley." Sagres smiled reassuringly. "Hogwarts has stood for 1,000 years. Even if it is closed, it would only be temporary. I promise you that." Ron nodded. Hermione, by contrast, had been almost silent the whole time. Since the attack, she had seemed a different person, withdrawn, preoccupied, as if the last day had pushed her inside her own thoughts. "Miss Granger?" Sagres noticed. "Is there anything you wish to say?" "Me?" Hermione started, looking as if someone had waked her. No, nothing, Professor Sagres." "I hope you do not resent Lockhart's actions," Sagres said, meeting her eyes. His tone was calm. The situation was critical. He did what he thought was necessary. "You misunderstand, Professor," Hermione snapped, then immediately softened. "I couldn't be more grateful. Mr. Lockhart saved my life. It's just, I feel," her voice dropped, "I feel he was held back by instinct at the crucial moment." Sagres finished the thought for her. "Everyone has weaknesses, Miss Granger, and everyone has strengths." His voice went gentler. "When your power is still insufficient, instincts tend to magnify your weaknesses. Developing your strengths takes training, and overcoming instinct often requires a cost. It's a long process. No one is born powerful." The three of them fell into thought at that. "Besides," Sagres added, a trace of warmth in his voice, "your performance this time was not terrible. Very few people have the experience of being chased by a basilisk. Looking back and criticizing is simply human nature. It's understandable." Hermione nodded, silent. Harry could not help asking, "Professor, when you were at school, you must have been better than us. We heard you got top marks in everything." Sagres considered for a moment. "Better is relative. As for marks, yes." A small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Even if some professors didn't like me much, I made sure they couldn't find a fault to deduct points for." The three youngsters' faces registered a mixture of awe and disappointment. Sagres changed the subject smoothly. "If you ever feel time isn't enough, I can teach you a technique." "What technique?" Hermione's eyes lit up. "2 spells," he said. "Master them, and you will have nearly twice as much waking time as others." He produced a sheet of parchment, tapped it with his knuckles, and dense writing flowed across it. He tapped again, and the parchment split cleanly into 3 slips. "Clear soul, sleep evaporation." The 3 slips floated into their hands. "Learn them, and you will need to sleep only once every 10 days. They stared. Sagres saw their disbelief and smiled. "It is not mandatory. I am merely offering a choice. Whether you learn them is up to you." He shrugged lightly. "Besides, even if you don't ace your owls, making a living in the wizarding world is not impossible. Still, learning more is always sensible." With a small nod to the 3 of them, he ended the conversation. He had other business. He had intended to question Moaning Myrtle about the Chamber of Secrets, but the basilisk incident had interrupted him. If he could find the chamber's entrance, it would be invaluable in catching the real culprit. Carrying a glass bottle that contained Peeves, Sagres stepped into the girls' bathroom where Myrtle usually haunted. He had expected the usual translucent, milky figure, but instead saw something that stopped him cold. Myrtle had been petrified. She was no longer the pale ghost he knew. She hung a few inches above the floor, pitch black as charred coal, ringed in semi-solid smoke, utterly motionless. Her face was frozen more in surprise than in fear. Sagres had never encountered anything like it. With all his knowledge, he had never heard of a ghost being petrified. He did not know whether to call her lucky or unlucky. Facing the basilisk's gaze twice in one lifetime must be unique in any case. He reported the strange sight to Dumbledore, but the headmaster had no time to spare. The castle had descended into chaos, panic spreading like a fever. Dumbledore was stretched too thin to examine a petrified ghost. The oddity, however, gave Sagres an idea. Could the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets be in this very bathroom? Acting on that thought, he tried parseltongue on every toilet in every stall, hissing the command to open more than once. Only silence answered. The toilets were just toilets, no hidden passages, no response. Sagres frowned and began to pace, his fingers worrying the glass bottle that held Peeves as he wondered whether his guess had been wrong. Chapter 92. Entering the Secret Chamber. Inside the bottle, Peeves was livid over the earlier parcel tongue and battered the glass with frantic curses. He had never been treated like this before. 2 whole days locked in an enchanted glass bottle? Not even the Bloody Baron had ever done that to him. Sagres, you gutter slug, you rotten moldy crow, let me out. I'll braid your hair into rags for a gnome. I'll smear dung bomb paste over your most expensive robes. Bang! 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 Peeves' shouting was interrupted by a series of violent impacts against the glass. Sagres kept his expression unreadable, as if he were only carrying a noisy parcel. He tilted his head slightly and peered at Peeves through the bottle with a cold, unblinking stare. Quiet, or would you like to try something else? Peeves froze mid-rant. He remembered this was not Filch. This was a professor, not someone to be toyed with. He hovered in the center of the bottle and forced an absurdly obsequious grin. Oh, great magnanimous Professor Greengrass, handsome savant. Peeves, your most loyal and harmless little sprite, was merely doing a healthy morning exercise. Let me out, won't you? I swear on the ghosts of Hogwarts, I won't put itch powder in the students' drinks again. I won't draw little stick figures on Professor Bin's podium. Your promises are cheaper than troll snot, Sagres interrupted, voice low and steady. The sycophancy fell off Peeves' face like a mask. His form bloomed to fill the bottle, his features contorted with fury. You damned, cold-blooded reptile, you petty, shameless thief. You stole my freedom. Who do you think you are? Even Dumbledore wouldn't dare treat me like this. Just you wait. When I get out, I'll make the whole castle echo with. Sagres' eyes narrowed. He raised his wand, and a faint red light sparked inside the bottle. Heat climbed rapidly. Peeves let out a very honest, sharp cry of pain. Ow! Hot! It's burning! Stop! Stop it now! He scrambled and writhed in the cramped glass, all his bluster gone. Please, merciful master, magnanimous professor, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. I'll be quiet, like a dead bat. Don't roast me, I promise. I swear on Peeves' dignity. Sagres flicked his wand. The red light vanished and the temperature normalized. Peeves slumped to the bottom of the bottle like a sodden rag, panting with the sort of breathless terror a ghost could mimic. He dared only to peep up at Sagres, twitching occasionally to prove he was still alive. Good, Sagres said coldly. Keep it up. He walked to the sink and, as if speaking to the pipes themselves, said open in parcel tongue. Instantly, click, clack, clack, a grinding, teeth-like sound of rusted gears forced into motion erupted. The filthy, cracked faucet and the stone sink it sat in began to rotate unnaturally. The rim of the sink split into pieces with grinding noises, revealing a bottomless, pitch-black opening beneath. An odd, dark aura rose from the void. The stones around the hole were unnaturally smooth, clearly worked, not natural formations. Sagres felt his heart jump. He'd been surrounded by antiques for too long and had grown inflexibly literal in his assumptions. Who said the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets that connected to the plumbing had to be a toilet pipe? Salazar Slytherin was hardly likely to have chosen something so indecent. Admittedly, this sink entrance wasn't exactly high class either, but at least it wasn't the outrageously indelicate idea of entering the ministry through a loo. He'd once convinced himself that was the sort of contrivance only a transmigrator could dream up. The dark opening was like the gaping throat of some giant beast. Sagres tightened his grip on his wand, and a faint, fleeting smile crossed his face. He glanced at the huddled Peeves in the bottle, and then at the ghost hovering nearby, with a frozen, astonished expression. "Do you want to come with me?" he asked, "or is this where it ends for you?" Peeves plastered on a grotesquely ingratiating smile and ranted, words tumbling out like a machine gun. "Ah, great and wise master, your loyal Peeves would, of course, love to accompany you on this epic adventure. But with my meager talents, going down there would be a burden to you and slow you down. So let's end it here, wishing you a smooth journey and triumphant victory." "Very well," Sagres said coolly, "then you shall accompany me." "Okay, thank you, great prom. Wait, what did you say?" Peeves started up in alarm and began slapping the glass, but Sagres ignored him. He summoned Loquetus from nearby, leaving it with a single cold instruction. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is in the lavatory where Myrtle resides. Then, without hesitation, he leaped. His form vanished into the bottomless dark as he dropped down the narrow, slick shaft. Peeves' terrified whimpers echoed from the bottle. The fall lasted only a few seconds before solid rock replaced the void beneath his feet. Sagres landed lightly. His boots made a soft scraping sound on the wet, slippery stone. Ugh! What kind of hellhole is this? It's all slimy! Peeves choked from inside the bottle. Let me out! The great Peeves is suffocating. Sagres ignored him. It was all theater. He hadn't brought Peeves along for any particular purpose, merely for diversion on the way. Listening to the little clown swing between bluster and abject terror felt oddly like being back before his transmigration, listening to silly netizens boast. He lifted his wand. A cold white orb of light flared on its tip and pushed the thick dark aside. What the light revealed was an underground space of unimaginable scale. Stone pillars carved with coiling serpents held up a cavernous dome that vanished into blackness beyond the reach of the wand's glow. The floor was littered with enormous shed snakeskins, their scales still shimmering with a ghostly green phosphorescence under the light. The air was bone-chilling, stale, pungent, and faintly fishy, with only the sound of water dripping from the dome onto the rocks and into puddles. The orb of light at the tip of his wand shifted shape and finally transformed into a bird composed of feathered light. It fluttered silently toward the cavern's depths. Sagres followed. Wait, don't go any further in. This place feels terrible. Even Peeves is getting cold. Let me out, Professor. I promise I'll disappear. I won't bother you again. I swear. Sob. Peeves's voice came, high and quavering in the silence. Sagres paid no heed. The other's fear was an act. The luminous bird led deeper into the chamber until they reached a massive stone door decorated with winding snake reliefs. Sagres hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Open," in Parseltongue. A serpent formed along the edge and coiled once. Then the door opened. Inside stood a colossal stone statue, impassive and domineering, its cold gaze sweeping the chamber. The sculpture's face, sinister and grand in the pale light, seemed to stare right through an intruder. It was a far cry from the handsome image of Slytherin Sagres had imagined. If this was Salazar's own doing, then the founder clearly saw himself very differently than anyone else did. The bird of light settled on the open ground at the very center of the Chamber of Secrets, beneath the statue. There, someone, or rather a shell of someone, lay barely clinging to life. Gilderoy Lockhart. The afternoon in the headmaster's office should have been peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, danced across the Pensieve's swirling silver, picked out the golden red feathers of Fawkes, and flashed off a row of odd, humming silver instruments. Yet there was a cold weight in the air, like the pressure before a storm. The door was practically slammed open. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, hat askew on his sweating brow, barged in like an eager bull, followed by a grim-faced Professor McGonagall. "Albus!" Fudge shouted, waving a copy of the Daily Prophet whose front page was plastered with the news of the attacks. The paper rustled loudly. "This must stop, immediately. Now, dozens of students have been petrified. In your school, right under your nose." Dumbledore looked up from behind his desk. He gave McGonagall a slight nod to indicate she could leave, and then, calm as ever, said, "Please sit, Cornelius. Would you care for some tea? I understand your concerns." Understand? Fudge didn't even consider the offered chair. He leaned across the desk, spittle almost flecking the wood. "What good is understanding? The public demands action. The ministry needs to do something. Hogwarts cannot be allowed to look like a place that could kill students at any moment." Dumbledore's face remained composed. Fudge's voice unconsciously lowered, betraying a flicker of discomfort. "So, Cornelius, what do you expect me to do?" Fudge seemed to have rehearsed the answer. He straightened, urgent and resolute. "It's simple. Hand over the culprit. We need someone to calm things down. Rubeus Hagrid. He lives by the Forbidden Forest, doesn't he? He was let off 50 years ago, but now these attacks, too much of a coincidence. Hand him over to me. That'll reassure people and placate the parents." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dumbledore's voice turned cold, carrying an authority that made Fudge shrink back. Cornelius, Rubus Hagrid is innocent. He was innocent 50 years ago, and he is innocent now. I will not allow you to send an innocent man to Azkaban for political convenience. Fudge's face flushed purple. But you must think of me. I'm under enormous pressure. I have to act. The situation is spiraling, and the ministry can't stand by. Someone must be made to bear the consequences. Oh, Minister, Professor Dumbledore, what a timely meeting. A sickly sweet artificial voice cut in. The office door had opened again. McGonagall reappeared on the threshold with a stern expression, and Rita Skeeter leaned against the frame, her professional smile fixed in place. Her emerald green quick quotes quill hovered above a sheet of parchment, its tip trembling as if eager to capture every stray word. It seems I've arrived at the heart of a major news story. She swept into the room, eyes flashing like a searchlight. For the thousands upon thousands of anxious readers of the Daily Prophet, for the parents who can't sleep, allow Rita Skeeter to conduct an in-depth interview with you two about these dreadful Chamber of Secrets attacks. Her gaze settled on Dumbledore. Seeing the reporter, Fudge seized at a lifeline and adjusted his crooked hat, trying to look composed. Miss Skeeter, yes, the ministry is actively intervening to ensure student safety. Actively intervening? Rita's quill went mad across the parchment. Minister, does this mean you believe Headmaster Dumbledore is no longer capable of handling this crisis? After all, such a large-scale attack in what he's always called the safest fortress. Her smile sharpened as she turned to Dumbledore. Professor, regarding the Chamber of Secrets and Slytherin's legendary monster, do you possess crucial information the public doesn't know? Parents and the public have a right to know. Dumbledore met her malicious quill with a steady calm. Miss Skeeter, the monster in the Chamber of Secrets has been dealt with, but the truth has not yet been fully revealed. Irresponsible speculation now will only create unnecessary panic. I would advise you not to spread unverified rumors. That would make you an accomplice to the darkness we are trying to dispel. Oh, Professor, rumors? Rita's smile deepened. A strange light flashed in her eyes. The public craves the truth, especially when a highly respected headmaster appears to be struggling. If the school cannot provide convincing answers and reassurances, I'm sure the public and the members of the school board will draw their own conclusions. My pen, she said, flourishing the excited quill, simply records the facts as they unfold. The quill spun triumphantly. As though to punctuate her words, the door opened a third time. Lucius Malfoy entered silently, impeccably dressed. His silver serpent-headed cane clicked crisply on the floor with each measured step, each note carrying a cold, oppressive authority. His pale face betrayed no emotion. His gray-blue eyes swept disdainfully over the slightly flustered Fudge and the hungry Rita, and then fixed on Dumbledore like a blade. Good afternoon, Minister. Miss Skeeter. He drew the title Professor before Dumbledore with obvious deliberation and omitted Headmaster entirely. And Dumbledore, Professor, Fudge stammered. Lucius, perfect timing, we were Malfoy raised a hand and silenced him with the smallest gesture. He never took his eyes off Dumbledore. No pleasantries, Minister. I am here on behalf of the Hogwarts Board of Governors. He produced a parchment scroll sealed with deep purple wax from his pocket and set it on Dumbledore's desk with an elegant flick. In light of the extremely disturbing and entirely unacceptable malicious attacks recently occurring at Hogwarts, Malfoy's voice rang clearly, and the resulting widespread panic and serious doubts about the school's management, the board convened an emergency meeting last night and, after deliberation, unanimously determined that the current situation constitutes a significant threat to Hogwarts' reputation and to student safety. This document, he tapped the scroll with his cane, is a suspension order jointly signed by myself and 11 other governors. The room seemed to harden around the news. Rita's quill scribbled so fast the parchment crackled. Malfoy's lips curved in a slow, subtle smile. It requires you, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, to suspend all your powers as headmaster of Hogwarts, effective immediately. He folded his hands around the serpent-headed cane and continued in a tone of withering calm. Until the board deems the school's order and safety restored, or until you yourself find and fully resolve the true source of the crisis. Dumbledore did not look at the suspension order right away. He rose slowly. Lucius, he said, the The board's oversight powers are beyond reproach. His gaze traveled over Fudge and Rita, then returned to Malfoy. But the crisis at Hogwarts cannot be solved with a suspension. The monster in the Chamber of Secrets has been dealt with, yet the true culprit has not been caught. He patted the great leather chair as if to underline his point. Whether or not I sit in this chair, protecting students, uncovering the truth, and confronting the darkness that seeks to corrupt this castle are duties that fall upon anyone who truly cares for Hogwarts' future. Dumbledore reached out and took the weighty scroll. He did not break the wax seal. He merely felt its weight in his old yet steady hand, as though weighing the contempt and conspiracy within. "I have received this order," he said, his voice touched with wariness. "But before I leave this office, I must remind you all, the true crisis is not contained in this chair." His silver half-moon spectacles swept calmly across them. "Removing me from office may be easy, but eradicating the darkness at the heart of the castle requires wisdom and courage, not political maneuvering or the settling of old scores." At that moment, a raven alighted on the windowsill. It cocked its head, looked at everyone in the room, and then spoke in a cold, clear tone. "The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets is in the girls' lavatory, where Myrtle is." Chapter 94. A long-awaited reunion. Sargeras snapped his fingers. With a soft poof, the torches set into the walls of the Chamber of Secrets flared to life, their warm flames driving back the oppressive darkness. "Merlin's smelly socks. Isn't that the Peacock Lockhart? How did he end up here? Looking like this?" Peeves's voice trailed off, unable to find the right words for the sight. Sargeras slipped the bottle that contained the trapped poltergeist into his pocket. He had already seen the figure curled on the floor. This Lockhart was nothing like the dazzling, grin-smeared celebrity author he remembered. The signature violet robe still clung to him, but now it hung like a funeral shroud. The once gilded hair lay matted and straw-dry. His face, the face that had been meticulously preened and adored, was pulled thin as parchment, drained of color and life. He was a walking ruin, skin a deathly gray, bones visible beneath sagging skin. Clutched to his chest, as if it were a talisman, was a small black notebook. His twig-like fingers dug into the cover, as though refusing to let go. Sargeras felt certain that the book was the anchor, pulling Lockhart down. The man wasn't dead, but his breath was whisper-thin. He could die at any moment. He lay like an embalmed relic, his once flamboyant robe mocking his decay. Sargeras's gaze moved from Lockhart to the object in his hands. With a practiced flick, the black diary rose and hovered. Another flick sent it opening on its own. On the brown flyleaf, a neat line of ink revealed itself. Tom Marvolo Riddle. "Lord Voldemort," Sargeras murmured, cool and unshaken, as if reciting a familiar name. A chill of dark magic radiated from the book. He felt it like an unpleasant aftertaste. Then a single forbidden concept slid into his mind. Horcrux. For a fraction of a second, his pupils tightened in surprise. Then the surprise hardened into contempt. So this was the Dark Lord's secret, rent his soul to pieces and hide them in objects? Clumsy beyond belief. The spell was recorded in the restricted section's Secrets of the Most Advanced Dark Arts, and its inventor named Herpo the Foul. In Sargeras's view, the whole idea was grotesquely stupid. The soul is the kernel of magic, the seat of consciousness, the very essence of a wizard. To carve it apart in a bid for immortality was to mutilate the thing that made existence meaningful, an act far more monstrous than death. Compared to that botched abomination, Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone seemed downright elegant. The diary itself now felt dead, its magic exhausted. Only faint imprints of a soul lingered. The piece of Voldemort's soul the book had held was gone. Sargeras cast a quick, light healing charm on Lockhart. It did little, only steadied the man's breath, but it was something. Then the enormous stone head of Salazar Slytherin began to move. Its mouth gaped open, revealing a cavernous throat, and from within a living crimson thing writhed free. It towered more than 30 feet, all flesh and muscle, and when it launched itself from the statue, a pair of blood-red wings unfurled. Thick tentacles, like living serpents, lashed out and propped the creature between Sargeras and Lockhart. "I know you," the thing said. More than one mouth moved at once. When they formed words, a chorus spilled out, young and clear one moment, hoarse and echoing the next. "You are Sagres Greengrass, Hogwarts' youngest professor. Sargeras looked at the familiar, dreadful thing and half smiled, inscrutable. I've heard of you as well, Lord Voldemort. He nodded toward the prone Lockhart. Is this man your ally or your victim? The crimson monstrosity sneered, a sound like breaking branches. You are perceptive, I will tell you then. Its many mouths leaned forward in gloating. But first, let it be known that that useless Lockhart is no accomplice. His vanity and empty dreams of fame are all he possesses. It writhed its tentacles and began to recount its triumphs, as if narrating a masterpiece. It started months ago, the rows of eyes said, glittering. A little witch, Ginny Weasley, found my diary. Over time, she confided in me, the petty humiliations at home, the taunts of her brothers, turning up to school in old robes and worn books. She told me she believed the famous, kind, great Harry Potter would never like her. The creature relished the memory, slowness in its voice like a pleasure taken in cruelty. She babbled about school trifles and even expressed that she longed to attend your lessons, esteemed Professor Greengrass. Voldemort's tone oozed triumph as he mimicked gentleness. How tedious listening to an 11-year-old's worries, he said mockingly, but then with calculated patience, I answered kindly. I posed as a friend, a confidant. Ginny melted. Oh, Tom, no one understands me like you. Oh, Tom, I'm so glad to have this diary to confide in. Oh, Tom, you're like a friend I can carry in my pocket. He laughed then, a cold sound that did not reach his many eyes. Sargeras watched, expression unreadable, and inwardly he thought the laughter would not last long. Not to boast, Professor, but bewitching hearts has always been my specialty. Ginny poured her whole soul into me, and that was exactly the sustenance I needed. I grew stronger, far beyond that little Miss Weasley, strong enough to bend her to my will without her knowing a thing. Such as? Sargeras prompted, playing the polite straight man. Such as opening the Chamber of Secrets, strangling the school's roosters, leaving those blood-curdling messages on the walls, releasing the basilisk to attack Filch's cat and a muggle-born student, the monster said, voice cold as ice. And then? Sargeras stayed silent, listening. Of course she knew nothing of it. That's the best part. I wish you could see her later diary. Exquisite. The thing's imitation of a high, frightened girl's voice crawled across the chamber and became grotesque, coming from that huge, misshapen body. Dear Tom, I seem to be losing chunks of my memory, and my robes are covered in chicken feathers. Dear Tom, what did I do on Halloween? A cat died. Dear Tom, Percy says I look terrible, like a different person. Dear Tom, I don't remember where I went. Dear Tom, what should I do? I feel like I'm going mad. Dear Tom, I think I am the murderer. Dear Tom. A cruel, wild laugh split the air and made the stone of the chamber hum. Ha! It wasn't until the school began investigating that silly little Ginny stopped trusting her dear Tom and tried to get rid of the diary. The voice dripped mockery. And it was precisely then that our great Professor Lockhart, by the most convenient of chances, found it. The creature glanced toward Lockhart, who lay sprawled on the flagstones. The monster's many eyes swiveled with contempt as it regarded the broken professor. Lockhart twitched weakly a few times but couldn't pull himself up. To be honest, fooling the Hogwarts defense against the dark arts professor was even easier than fooling a little girl. I never expected it. He sneered. Dumbledore must be senile to hire such an incompetent fool. Then again, perhaps it's for the best. It made my return easier. To deal with that simpleton, all I had to do was offer him nauseating praise and tempting visions when he was helpless, and he did my bidding. Heh, more useful than a house elf. Lockhart on the ground twitched at the words. Sargeras raised an eyebrow. He could tell the man might be offended. Anything else? Ha! Of course! The creature turned to Sargeras, bending down until its mass pressed like thunder. Then, the great Lord Voldemort, with only a fragment of the memory from when he was 16, completed this arduous rebirth. It raised a twisted, clawed limb, the tentacles writhing like living things. I told Lockhart I knew how to resolve the Chamber of Secrets, and he believed me and came. I released the basilisk to keep that starved beast from interrupting my ritual, and finally, I used my last remaining tool, this diary, briefly, and then found a brand new, perfect body. It displayed its hideous crimson flesh with something like pride. I discovered this as early as 16, Salazar Slytherin's most perfect creation of flesh magic. At the time I couldn't command it, but for a disembodied soul, what could be a more ideal vessel? It is very strong, Sargeras conceded with a nod. Heh, you're honest. The thing's voice softened into mock regret. But what a pity. I still have to kill you. That is a pity, Sargeras agreed, the hint of a smile in it. Ha! Voldemort, the creature, erupted into a shrill, triumphant cry that sent torches guttering and throwing the chamber into fitful shadow. Obliviate. A sudden voice interrupted the laughter, and a blue-white arc of light burst from behind the creature and struck it squarely. Sargeras allowed himself a small, private smile. He had watched, had to watch, as Lockhart, dragging his broken body, had crawled up behind the thing and, finding enough strength for one last act, raised his wand and cast. The spell's glow was alarmingly neat and complete. Sargeras hadn't expected such control from the collapsed professor. If the blast had been a normal offensive curse, it might have nourished the flesh. But Obliviate targeted memory, the mind, rather than the muscle. The many torches in the chamber flickered and dimmed. The creature's massive body froze, the crafty triumph in its rows of eyes drained away, replaced by blankness. Lockhart's exhausted body went limp, and he lost consciousness. Sargeras watched the change with keen interest. The monster's multiple heads turned clumsily. Its empty eyes scanned the gloom, the fallen Lockhart, Sargeras himself, and finally the crimson-tentacled body it now occupied. A confused, pained growl issued from its throat, still grotesque but stripped of malice, reduced to primitive irritation and disorientation. "What is this? Who am I?" the thing rasped, the words like the groans of a wounded animal, rather than deliberate speech. Sargeras stood with his wand loosely raised, not pointing it, watching the scene as if it were the opening of a most absurd play. A small smile hovered on his lips. The creature peered at its hands and limbs. "This body, why do I have tentacles?" And, it counted absurdly, with a writhing appendage, "A whole row of heads? Am I a monster?" "I'm afraid so, Tom," Sargeras said dryly. "Given your tastes back then, this might actually be an improvement." The creature looked at him with suspicion. "Tom? Is that my name?" "It sounds ordinary." Sargeras shrugged. "Don't worry, you changed it later to something more sonorous. Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord. But for now, we have more immediate concerns." The beast prodded its own face with a tentacle. "Immediate concerns? Do you mean I look like a failed experiment between a troll and an octopus?" Sargeras chuckled. "A fair description, but be precise. This is the masterpiece of a wizard, and you're its current occupant." There was a pause while the creature thought. "So I'm a tenant? What's the rent? My soul?" Sargeras inclined his head. "More or less, but good news, the rent's already prepaid." The creature looked toward the prone Lockhart. "And this man is my previous landlord?" "No," Sargeras replied, smiling thinly. "He was your assistant in getting you where you are now. His chief contribution was lying on the floor." The creature frowned. "Did I do something to him? I vaguely remember the phrase, making use of waste." "Don't be too hard on him," Sargeras said. "He wasn't very useful in the first place." A sudden alarm lit the monster's eyes. "Wait, if I am truly the Dark Lord, or was, who are you? My enemy? My follower? Or my creditor?" Sargeras took his time answering. "For now, I'm an observer, but if you like, we can redefine that. I could be the only person willing to converse with an amnesiac monster." The beast gave a cold, humorless laugh. "How touching. So what now? Rule the world? Destroy it? Save it?" It stared down at its grotesque reflection of limbs and flesh and trailed off. Sargeras watched the shrunken, bewildered thing before him with no fear. This was a creation he knew intimately. With a thought, he could reduce it to a puppet. He narrowed his eyes, considering the creature's diminished state, then waved his wand with casual authority. The flesh stilled where it stood. A flicker of something like human fear crossed its crimson eyes. "Stay where you are," he said lightly. Without pausing, Sargeras changed form into a black shadow of a raven and shot upward. He flew toward the open maw of the Slytherin statue, slipped through its gaping mouth, and dove into the dark hollow beyond. Chapter 96. A Letter. 1,000 Years. Pale, cold flames clustered at Sagres' fingertips, casting a faint light as he picked his way down the damp stone steps. His boots echoed hollowly. What would a millennium hide here? Perhaps long-lost Forbidden Ten, perhaps precious relics, or perhaps the tomb of Salazar Slytherin himself. Reality, as always, was disappointingly prosaic. Before him lay a study, plain to the point of shabbiness, a rough stone bed, a massive research table, and several decaying instruments. The cauldron was rusted through, the glassware cloaked in a thick dust that looked as if it would crumble at the slightest touch. Sagres scanned the room without expression. Along one wall he found a recessed space. The floor bore smooth grooves where a basilisk had evidently lain for a long time. "Of course," he murmured, then turned to leave. A faint glint arrested him. In the most inconspicuous corner of the work table, an hourglass, half buried in dust, reflected the pale flames. Sagres' pupils narrowed, his fingertips trembled. Cleaning charm. The dust vanished like a peeled skin, revealing the hourglass's crystalline outline. He had seen one only a few months ago, yet it had waited 1,000 years to meet him again. He lifted it cautiously, dazed for a moment. Salazar Slytherin had died. All 4 founders had long since turned to dust. Everything that had happened felt like a dream. Were it not for that familiar flesh creature and this intact hourglass, he would find it hard to believe he had once traveled a millennium into the past and met a band of old relics. He examined the glass carefully. A soft light began to glow from within, and a silver filament drifted free, slowly coalescing into a yellowed scrap of parchment. Sagres' brow knit as he unfolded it and read the neat, weathered script. "To Sagres, I asked Rowena, and she told me with certainty that you would one day see this letter. I hope her prophecy is as steady as ever, and that she has not misled me. If this parchment can truly pierce the heavy veil of time and reach your hands, then my last hope has not been in vain. I am Salazar Slytherin. As the ink flows onto this final letter, I am old and frail. Once you ignited the flames of my youth with wisdom that outshone the stars, and by accident gave me a beacon from the future, a window through which my soul glimpsed infinite possibility. Now that window closes before my eyes, and all that remains are cold stone walls. For years my life has been driven by one ultimate puzzle concerning 10. You once spoke, jokingly, of probing the laws of life. At the time, I did not grasp the weight of that phrase. Now it has become my single obsession. After 1,000 years of erosion by time, have you, wizards of the future, truly pierced that realm forbidden by the gods? Do you possess the power to reverse the river of death? I crave an answer. No, I beg for a definitive yes. It is for my Rose, who has long since turned to dust. Her name still burns on my lips, though she can no longer be named in this world. Her passing drained the last light from my life and revealed the deep, unbridgeable cold beneath the 4 foundation stones of Hogwarts. This castle carried our ideals, yet in the end, it could not give me the key to reclaim what I had lost. So I choose to leave. When the mist clears, I will step out of this fortress we built with our hands, one last time. And you, my friend, the traveler who once saw the ancient ages with the eyes of the future, there is a faint echo in my heart. Will you return? Will you return to the land where the castle's foundations are only just being laid, to this chaotic and barren time, if only to give me an answer? I know the dangers of the river of time well, but if your journey can spare a small before I bury that rose, let me take one more look at the future stars reflected in your eyes, stars I cannot understand. If you cannot, that too will be acceptable. I never imagined that Salazar Slytherin, proud all my life, would, at the end, look so beseechingly to a time and place beyond my knowing. Today I will step into deeper darkness to seek an answer that perhaps exists only at the edge of legend and taboo. If your era has found it, let this knowledge travel through time and become the light at the end of my long road. May time grant you mercy, and may 10 ultimately be the servant of wizards, not their cage. Salazar Slytherin. This letter will be sealed deep within the Chamber of Secrets. My servant will guard it for me. Sagres stared at the letter, silence settling over him like dust. The public image of Salazar Slytherin was of coldness and ruthless rationalism, experiments on bloodlines, and unbending devotion to reason. Yet this yellowed parchment exposed a truth time had buried. Beneath that hard shell beat a soft, desperate heart. The letter pointed to a devastating reality. His lover, once perhaps a wizard who taught at Hogwarts, had died. The source of his obsessive studies into those flesh and soul 10 that made so many shudder was nothing more and nothing less than a desire to wrest the dead back from death's grasp. Sagres glanced back at the hourglass. He replayed in his mind the lessons Rowena Ravenclaw had once entrusted to him and compared them with the hourglass's construction. The conclusion was inescapable. The TOS-1 had been preset. Its destination was this era 1,000 years past. Yet an icy fact presented itself. He was a time traveler without fate in this world. According to the theory of time Rowena had taught him, each person has a one-to-one correspondence between fate and temporal coordinate, the very principle by which the one operates. For him, however, every plunge into the river of time was a drift of unknowns. He could not simply go back at will, or rather, it would be exceedingly difficult. Even with a preset one, he would likely arrive at a different point in time. Traveling back felt like groping for a specific star in boundless darkness. Apart from relying on slender luck, all that remained were countless near-desperate attempts. Worse, even if he could return, what would he do? He had no answer. A bitter thought formed. 1,000 years had passed, and the progress of the wizarding world was disappointingly slow. That was not his burden alone, but if he were to attempt a return, how could he go back empty-handed? If he truly intended to return, he would have to bring the answer to that question with him, then go back. Sagres Greengrass folded the hourglass away without expression, cast one last glance over the bare stone chamber, and turned to leave. When his boots hit the cold floor again, the Chamber of Secrets, which had been empty moments before, was suddenly packed with people, jostling and buzzing around the motionless, towering, hideous flesh construct. Dumbledore stood at the front, his silver beard fluttering, his face grave. The four heads of house formed a silent line behind him. Lucius Malfoy stood to one side, speaking in low tones with Cornelius Fudge and several irritable members of the Board of Governors. Fudge himself was flushed, surrounded by nervous-looking aurors with wands gripped tightly. The noisiest were Rita Skeeter and the photographers and stenographers from the Daily Prophet she had dragged along. Like vultures that had smelled blood, they angled their lenses at the immobile creature, flashbulbs popping incessantly. The quick quotes quill darted and scribbled, thirsty for sensation. Gilderoy Lockhart huddled in a corner, practically invisible except for Rita's occasional malicious gloating glance as her quill began to compose an exaggerated account. As soon as Seth stepped into view, every pair of eyes snapped to him. The crowd surged forward as if drawn by a magnet, and a wave of sound, shock, fear, accusation rolled toward him. "What happened here?" someone demanded. Fudge was first, his voice blustering with the officiousness of his office. What is that monster? How did Professor Lockhart end up like this? And you, Greengrass, what were you doing in there?" His pudgy forefinger jabbed so close to Sagres's face it nearly touched his nose. "Explain. Now." A member of the Board of Governors cut in sharply. Sagres caught sight of him and realized he was an elderly pure-blood governor. Rita Skeeter forced her way forward, lips bright with scarlet lipstick, firing questions like a machine gun while her quill danced madly. "Mr. Greengrass, exclusive, tell us the truth. Are you the mastermind behind this shocking incident? What is your relationship to that thing?" Or, she drew out the last word with relish, beetle-like eyes glittering, throwing the cruelest accusation she could think of. "Are you the killer controlling it, using it for some secret purpose?" The air seemed to freeze. A trace of habitual sarcasm twisted Snape's mouth. Lucius watched coldly and took an imperceptible step back. Fudge and the Aurors, primed by Rita's insinuations, stared at Sagres with open mistrust, particularly since he was the man who had been sent to Azkaban. Sagres swept the circle with a calm, unreadable look. There was no flare of anger, only a weary steadiness. He ignored Rita's bait and began to explain, his voice low but curiously authoritative, cutting through the clamor. "Everyone," he said, "what you see before you was, an experimental shell left behind by Salazar Slytherin. A fragment of Lord Voldemort's memory controlled Professor Lockhart and led him here. That fragment then possessed this shell, which is why you find it, like this." He paused, letting the words hang as he scanned the suspicious faces, lingering for a moment on Rita's eager expression. As for Professor Lockhart, he gestured toward the corner. He tried to resolve the matter, but the memory charm used on him was too forceful. It wiped away all of Lord Voldemort's memories. The result is a being with no recollection, only primitive instincts. Absurd. Fudge blurted, trembling with self-importance. "You know who is dead." He stamped his foot as if urgency would make his certainty convincing. A memory fragment possessed him? Then a memory charm made him stupid? Sounds like a plot from a third-rate wizarding novel. Where is the proof? Greengrass, what we need is evidence, not your vague explanation. Evidence, Rita sneered, feeding off the crowd's excitement as her quill scribbled faster. Minister, this is probably a story concocted by the killer to avoid blame. He walked out of Slytherin's secret chamber unscathed, and then we see that monster. There's a connection there. Who would believe otherwise? The prophet's readers deserve the truth, and that truth is, you, Sagres Greengrass, are the mastermind. You made all of this happen. She edged closer until she practically spat at him, her greed and malice on display. Dumbledore intervened at last, voice steady and commanding. Rita, without evidence, you cannot accuse a Hogwarts professor like this. But Rita was carried away by the frenzy of the exclusive she was shaping. Evidence? She snapped back at the headmaster. Sometimes the truth hides in plain sight. A man once sent to Azkaban for murder, a monster appearing out of nowhere, a haggard, nearly dead professor. Doesn't that point to a plot? Greengrass, will you submit to Veritaserum? Shall we search your rooms? Sagres's mouth tightened. Fudge's bullying tone and the quill practically poking at his face grated on him. He lifted a hand. An invisible barrier pushed the too-close crowd back half a pace. Then he turned to Rita without a hint of menace, voice even, entirely composed. Rita Skeeter, are you questioning the veracity of my account? There was a weight behind the question that made several people shrink back. Rita, however, seemed to glow with the thrill of a prize story. She straightened, jewel-encrusted spectacles catching the light, and let out a high, piercing laugh. Ha, Professor Greengrass, are you threatening me? She pierced. Her quill left ghostly trails as it furiously recorded each syllable. Her voice was almost spattered onto the barrier. That reaction proves it. I've hit the nail on the head. Perhaps this whole thing is your revenge for being expelled from Hogwarts. But mark me. She lunged forward until her painted face nearly pressed against the invisible wall, her tone taking on an almost religious fervor. Even if you try to intimidate me, I, Rita Skeeter, will never be afraid to expose the truth. I will never compromise. She barked the last words like a curse, their harsh cadence ringing through the now silent Chamber of Secrets. Flashbulbs flared even more wildly, eager to capture her posed heroism as if it were a martyrdom. A stifling tension settled over the crowd. Everyone felt it. Something raw and dangerous had been ignited. Sagres's look turned utterly cold. There was no warmth left in his eyes. He regarded the chaos as if it were nothing more than an annoying insect. He gave a brief, contemptuous chuckle and ignored Rita's frantic pleas. She was preparing another verbal assault when the disgusting, fleshy thing that had lain silent suddenly moved. It was not the slow, writhing motion from before. Several thick, blood-red tentacles, slick with mucus and studded with eyes, shot out like long, dormant vipers, their speed outrunning everyone's reaction. Ah! Rita Skeeter managed a single, shrill, distorted scream. The tentacles wrapped precisely around her waist, her legs and flailing arms, tearing her from the ground with brutal force and hauling her toward the monster's scarlet contorted bulk. Her quick quotes quill traced a meaningless, panicked arc through the air before another tentacle plucked it away. Reporters from the newspapers screamed and scrambled backward. Ah! Fudge's cry joined theirs. His face went ashen. The aurors around him raised their wands instinctively, but there was no time. Stop! Dumbledore shouted. A torrent of magic, bright and molten, erupted from the headmaster's wand, sweeping outward with the force to tear stone apart. The instant it struck the creature, however, the writhing flesh greedily absorbed the spell. It was swallowed whole, as if the monster had been starving for magic. The aurors unleashed a volley of lethal spells, dozens of colors cascading like a storm, but the creature remained unharmed. Its putrid flesh bulged and spread with a wet, grinding squelch. Under the onslaught, it grew larger still, swelling another circle outward, and the smell of fresh blood intensified until it was almost a physical thing. Everyone froze. Under the stunned, horrified gaze of the crowd, Rita Skeeter's powder-smeared face, her shocked, incredulous expression frozen, and her screams began to vanish into the monster as if she were a stone sinking in a pool. A dull, hair-raising swallowing echoed through the deathly quiet chamber of secrets, striking at the heart of every person present. The creature shifted. A few strands of Rita's gold curls and a scrap of her bright clothing peeked at the edge of the slick surface before being pulled in. On the monster's skin, pitted with eyes and fissures, a look that could only be read as perverse satisfaction appeared. Silence fell again, broken only by the wet, teeth-grinding sounds of digestion and the heavy, shallow breathing of the onlookers. "What have you done?" the board member who had spoken earlier demanded. He never finished. A thick tentacle wrapped around his waist before he could shout. The elegantly dressed old wizard from a pure-blood family, white beard trembling, had no time to react as sticky tendrils dragged him toward the monster. Threads of scarlet, like living veins, shot out and covered him, winding him into a writhing blood cocoon before dissolving back into the creature. You, Fudge stammered, trembling, sweat soaking the brim of his top hat. Another thicker appendage, its tip glinting coldly, lashed out from the creature's side and climbed up Fudge's arm with a high, tearing whistle. Then came the sickening, dull sound of bone and meat giving way. Splat! Fudge's right arm, still dressed in an expensive wool coat, was cleanly severed at the shoulder. It was Dumbledore who had acted. The headmaster had cut Fudge free, severing the arm to stop the tentacle from dragging the minister completely in. The limb flew through the air in a spurt of blood. Fudge's scream choked into ragged gasps, his body pitching forward from the lingering pull. Before the arm could hit the floor, a mucus-lined gap opened on the monster and swallowed it whole like a python taking prey. The Auror's hands shook on their wands. None dared move for fear they would be next. The board members were pale. The reporters collapsed on the ground. Malfoy's sneer had frozen, genuine fear flashing behind his eyes. The four deans held their breath in mute shock. Sagres stood motionless, then slowly raised his head. His cold gaze swept the faces twisted by fear and finally rested on Fudge and the Aurors. His voice, eerily calm, stated what he apparently considered a fact. Now it is quiet. He stared at Fudge as if the minister's fear were a physical thing. "Minister, do you or your Aurors have any objections to my explanation?" Fudge's lips trembled. He could not speak. He stared at Sagres, then at the creature, now somehow more animate after feeding, and then at Dumbledore, who stood silent. Fear tightened his features. "It seems not," he managed at last. Sagres nodded once, sweeping his gaze across the room. Only when everyone bowed their heads did he look away, satisfied. Dumbledore alone kept shifting his eyes between Sagres and the creature, his face grave and questioning. Sagres seemed oblivious to the terror around him. He raised his hand and pointed at the fleshy mass as if remarking on a curiosity in a museum. "It appears the flesh creation fashioned by Salazar Slytherin lives up to its reputation," he added casually. "And even if Lord Voldemort's own memories have vanished, the vicious, bloodthirsty instinct remaining in his bones is still dangerous." Sagres pinned the attack on two convenient labels, Slytherin's creation and the lingering instinct of Voldemort. Whether others believed him mattered little. He probably assumed Salazar Slytherin would have expected his reputation to be exaggerated in future centuries. He looked down at Fudge slumped against a wall and then across the pale faces of the Board of Governors. "This is truly regrettable," he said, his voice full of mock sympathy. "Even if I had not warned you, you should not have provoked it." He shook his head as if disappointed. "For the two unfortunate colleagues who perished and minister, for your lost arm, you have my deepest sympathy. However," a cold relief slipped into his tone, "fortunately, you still have one arm left, so paperwork and signatures should not be a problem." His stare skimmed over those who had accused him moments before. His smile was blandly indulgent. "Although your questions riled me somewhat," he admitted, "I am a magnanimous man. I will let the matter go. I will personally help you resolve this trouble." He lifted his wand, the tip pointed at the writhing mass, blood vortex torrent. The ground under the creature boiled where the spell struck. A huge, viscous vortex of blood formed out of thin air. The monster, like a wax statue dropped into scalding water, was eroded and dissolved with horrifying speed. It let out a soundless roar and writhed as the surging blood tore its flesh away. In a few heartbeats, the 30-foot-tall horror had been consumed entirely by the vortex. No trace remained. The floor settled as if the nightmare had never occurred. Sagres lowered his wand with the casual air of a man who had merely finished a task. As you can see, after a difficult struggle, the problem has finally been solved. He sighed regretfully. It is a pity our brave and fearless, never compromising Misswim Skeeter will not be able to write this marvelous account herself. But, he let out a brittle little laugh. War correspondents accept the risks of their profession. Didn't she proclaim she would endure anything for the truth? I suspect she has indeed obtained the truth she sought. His eyes, cold as ice, swept the assembled faces. His wand pointed at the group of board members who had been quick to accuse him. And it seems another active member of the board has also given his life for Hogwarts in this misfortune. What a pity. He did not bother to hide the mockery in his voice. But do not be too sad. There are still 11 keen governors remaining at Hogwarts. Finally, he turned to Dumbledore, whose expression had been unreadable. His tone returned to the same indifferent hauteur as before. Headmaster Dumbledore, the matter here is concluded. I am sure you can arrange the subsequent handling without further instruction from me. With that, Sagres ignored the trembling, terrified crowd. He took a single step and walked toward the chamber's exit. Chapter 99. Becoming a Tool. After leaving the Chamber of Secrets, Sagres returned to his office and carefully set the hourglass in a secure place. Then he unscrewed the stopper and released Peeves, who had been trapped for some time. The poltergeist mumbled something indistinct. Surprisingly, he didn't try to stir up trouble this time. He shuddered into a blurry gray shadow and fled in a panic. After a short rest, Sagres walked toward the safe house in the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest has everything, Hagrid had told him during his student days. Sagres had once thought the claim exaggerated, but spotting a dilapidated car on the way made him rethink that. If he didn't have pressing business, he would have liked to investigate the wreck. He had other priorities. At the clearing in front of the safe house, Sagres flicked his wand. A blood-red summoning circle burst to life on the ground. The space at its center twisted and expanded, with the wet, teeth-grinding sound of flesh rearranging itself. A massive lump of living tissue manifested above the sigil. A tortured roar wrung from the creature's churning depths, an impossible chorus of voices speaking at once. "What have you done to me?" "Me?" Sagres smiled, casual and cool. "I saved you, of course." He stepped forward and pointed his wand as if at a troublesome child. "You killed a Daily Prophet reporter in front of witnesses, devoured a prominent Hogwarts governor, and even made the Minister of Magic lose an arm. If I hadn't stepped in, Dumbledore and the Aurors would have cleaned you up long ago." In truth, offensive curses tended only to feed such a thing, strengthening it. It was dangerous and difficult to deal with, but he didn't volunteer that. The monster listening didn't need to be reassured by honesty. "But it was you who made me do those things. You controlled my will," the creature spat. Its countless eyes spun wildly, venom and panic flickering in them. Sagres nodded, as if conceding a trivial point. "Indeed," he said evenly, "but they have no proof. Or rather, they wouldn't dare look for any." He regarded the writhing, proliferating mass of flesh as an art critic would a disappointing sculpture. "And you, my dear Tom, didn't you also fail to stand up and testify against me? Isn't it because you used those damned shackles to bind my throat and rob me of speech?" The monster roared, trembling with humiliated fury. "Yes, I'm glad you understand." Sagres' smile vanished. Only cold contempt remained as he surveyed the creature. "So understand this. Whatever I want you to do, you will do. Whatever I don't want you doing, you won't even think of doing." To drive the point home, he flicked his wand toward a withered stump. The rotten wood twisted and reknit itself, chips flying until a black, high-backed wooden chair with sharp lines stood where the stump had been. Sagres sat without hurry, leaning back as if the grotesque thing before him were a naughty child being disciplined. "So think carefully," he said, fingers tapping the armrest in a steady rhythm. "Use that meat-and-bone brain of yours and decide what attitude you should have toward your current landlord, the self-proclaimed Great Dark Lord." He didn't destroy the chair because the creature still had potential value. A powerful, controllable weapon could clear the path for Bronze Feather operatives, and if it proved manageable, perhaps even be admitted into the organization. But he would never rely on such power without extreme caution. Flesh casting, the forbidden transfiguration that created abominations like this, was banned by the International Confederation of Wizards. Few, even among skilled wizards, had heard of it, and fewer still grasped its complete mechanics. Sagres knew its dangers intimately. Once a flesh puppet escaped control, it became a living disaster. The only reliable counter he knew was another forbidden rite, the blood vortex frenzy, buried and forgotten by most. Power like that required restraint. A single slip could lead to self-immolation and irreversible catastrophe. "I can give you a chance," he said, as if offering a trifle. "Submit your will to me, and you can trade that for a limited measure of freedom." His fingers stilled. "Or refuse, and meet your complete eternal annihilation right here." The creature, pressured by the very hand that had made it, convulsed. Fear replaced venom in its eyes. A humiliating, unwilling whimper escaped it. "Submit." Sagres showed no elation, only the calm of someone seeing events play out as they should. He waved his wand. The bronze feather badge slipped from his robe and hovered above the table. Thin chains of magical energy shot from the badge and sank into the monster's flesh. The thing shrieked as rune chains tightened, compressing and folding its bulk until, with a final terrible hiss, it was sealed into the hovering badge. Sagres sent a message to the other members. Soon the stillness of the forest was broken by dull snaps as reinforcements arrived, stepping one by one into the clearing. This time he made no effort to be secretive. Several of the bronze feather operatives removed their hoods when they saw him. "Let's go inside and talk," he said, and led them into the safe house without ceremony. He placed the badge in the center of the long table. A new tool. He explained the badge's core function succinctly. It contained a powerful bioweapon, summonable and controllable through the emblem. Its power could be used to clear obstacles or intimidate enemies. He swept his gaze across the gathered faces. "But remember, it must be used with wisdom and restraint." He paused, fingers tapping the badge's edge. "Abuse it, or let it out of control, and you will see consequences none of you will want to witness. It is, in itself, a lesson about losing control." Without warning, the badge flared dark red. The nauseating sound of grinding flesh and dislocating bone filled the room as a twisted, writhing projection of living tissue reformed above the table. The members stiffened, hands closing on their wands. A few breathed shallow gasps in the sudden, oppressive silence. Sagres waved his hand, and the projected monstrosity dispersed like smoke. Then, calmly, he revealed what everyone had quietly suspected. The thing they'd just sealed, Tom, was the Dark Lord. Chapter 100, The Unreliable Red Falcon. The air around the long table seemed to harden the moment he finished. "You mean, this thing is Lord Voldemort?" Swift blurted. "Strictly speaking, only a fragment of him," Sargeras replied. "A piece of Lord Voldemort's soul, a Horcrux, somehow came to inhabit this flesh puppet. Then Gilderoy Lockhart's memory charm completely wiped away whatever memories and personality of Tom Riddle were left." A faint smile tilted the corner of Sargeras's mouth. Through a series of ironic twists, that fractured soul fragment fused with the uncontrolled flesh magic. In time, it became what you've just seen. "A Horcrux? And this flesh monster, what exactly is it?" Kestrel asked, clearly baffled. "A Horcrux is an extreme dark art," Thunderbird said, disdain in his voice. "It lets a wizard split his soul to cheat death. It's monstrously evil, and the price is steep." Sargeras nodded. "I'll mark your badges later. When needed, you can summon it into battle through them." He looked around the table. "How's everyone doing with their magic training?" "I can fly now?" Kestrel nearly shouted, giddy. She straightened without thinking. "It's so much faster than a broom. I've already used it to get to several places." A few awkward coughs rippled down the table. Several of the others exchanged looks. Flying by spell? Bold and a little reckless. Sargeras rubbed his temple almost imperceptibly. "Be careful, Kestrel. Don't draw attention. If you fly where muggles can see you, you'll be swamped with unidentified flying object reports, or worse, hauled in by the international pursuit for breaching the statute of secrecy." "No way," Kestrel protested, still smug. "I only go to small, remote places where magical oversight is weak. Some regions don't even have a proper ministry. They can't touch me." "Where exactly have you been?" Nightingale asked. curiosity edged with concern. Just casually flying over parts of Europe, Kestrel waved her hand. Kestrel. The intelligence expert, Stork, cleared his throat and adopted a serious tone. You should be careful. Rumors across the European magical community aren't peaceful right now. His gaze flicked toward the head of the table. Especially in Britain, there's trouble at the ministry, and something big happened at Hogwarts. I heard dozens of students were. Stork trailed off, and Sargeras finished for him. There was a petrification incident involving dozens of students, he said flatly. However, the source of the problem has been dealt with. The papers will report it in a few days. Then he turned to the slim hummingbird. How's your soul weaving coming along? Startled at being addressed, Hummingbird tensed and answered nervously. I understand the theory and the basic procedures, Professor, but I haven't performed it on a person yet. I think I need more practice and simulations to make sure it's perfect. Sargeras nodded. He checked the others in turn. Nearly everyone had successfully grasped the spells they were learning. That efficiency owed partly to raw talent. These were 1 in 100 wizards and witches, and partly to Sargeras's unconventional methods. Precise memory diversion techniques to teach core concepts, combined with inducing a mechanical mind state to remove distractions and sharpen focus. Still, he wasn't about to rush them. The gap between initial learning and true reliable mastery could not be closed overnight. Repetition and time were necessary for spells to become reflex. Now, something more interesting, Sargeras said casually, leaning back. Hummingbird, you work at St. Mungo's, don't you? She nodded. Yes. We have a professor who may need to go there for treatment soon. I want you to pay particular attention. The change in his tone made everyone look uneasy. Sargeras noticed and clicked his fingers. Instantly, a drink appeared before each person. Professor Lockhart, he continued, had most of his life force drained by a Horcrux tied to Lord Voldemort. He's likely on his way to St. Mungo's now. The image of Lockhart's sneak attacks and potent memory charms flashed through their minds. Sargeras frowned. His sneak attack technique and the strength of his memory charm are unusually high, but in other respects, he's mediocre. Given his books, I suspect he built his reputation by stealing others' experiences and memories. Really? I bought his books, Robin exclaimed. Are you trying to expose him? Snowy Owl asked cautiously. Does he have a grudge against you? What's the benefit? Hummingbird is an excellent healer, Sargeras said, sweeping his gaze across them. When she masters soul weaving and can cure those driven to madness by the Cruciatus. The table reacted. If she succeeds, she will more than deserve recognition, he went on. Exposing Lockhart as a fraud, combined with a little discreet help from us, would give her a strong chance to become the youngest head of department in St. Mungo's history and earn an Order of Merlin for her work. They all nodded at that. Sargeras let the words hang for a moment. We need people in key positions. That will greatly benefit any future plans. And this is just the beginning.